deserts, the driest places on Earth, covering more than a fifth of all the world's landmass, as dangerous to life as the highest peak or the coldest glacier. But in these harsh and barren wastelands, nature endures. People have lived in the desert since the beginning of time. Resilient and resourceful, they have developed unique cultures and deep spiritual bonds with these arid lands. But the modern world of commerce and industry is encroaching on the desert, claiming its resources, changing the delicate balance of life. Now, more than ever, desert people must adapt to survive. This series tells their story of struggle and endeavor, of humanity's continuing relationship with the most challenging places on Earth. Jerusalem, a city built at the very edge of the desert. One of the holiest places on Earth, sacred to three faiths. For Jews, Jerusalem is the center of their promised land and of their world. It's where Solomon's temple stood and Herod's temple after it, and where one day many Jews believe a third temple may stand. Jerusalem is also sacred to Muslims. It's from here Muslims believe that Muhammad ascended to heaven. And for Christians, Jerusalem is central to the key events which gave birth to their faith. It's the city where Jesus was tried and crucified and died, and where he rose again. From all over the world, Christians come here to follow their Lord's last journey to his place of execution. On high days and religious holidays, the streets of the old city are a crush of pilgrims seeking to worship and celebrate. But in all the push and shove, it isn't easy to get close to God. That's why so many pilgrimages here also include time spent in the wilderness, which lies just outside the city's walls. The Judean Desert, the desert of the soul. The spiritual significance of the desert is deep and ancient. It runs through all three faiths. For Muslims, the desert is hot, dry, infertile, the very opposite of the perpetual gardens of paradise. Jewish prophets look forward to the desert blooming, to streams in the wilderness. And before beginning his ministry, Jesus himself withdrew to this desert, to solitude and quiet contemplation, to nothing but the absolute essentials of life. Over the centuries, many followed Christ's example. In the cliffs and crannies of the Judean Desert, monasteries housed those who felt called to renounce the world, to live as far from luxury and distraction as humans can. Even simpler, even more solitary, were the rock caves that became hermits' cells. Today, pilgrims arrive here by the coachload, but their quest is much the same, to reconnect with what really matters.
መጽሐፍ ቅዱስ እንዳነበብነው አሁን ደግሞ በአይናችን እያየው ስለሆነ በጣም ትልቅ ደስታ ነው።
Ruth Sayon is one of a group of Ethiopian Christians who've come today to Qasr al-Yahud, a desert location traditionally regarded as the place where Jesus' ministry began. In Sunday school, Ruth will have learned that Jesus was baptized in the River Jordan immediately before he went into the desert to fast and pray, and to be tempted by the devil. Many Christians believe that this is where the baptism happened. The Bible says that when Jesus rose up from the river, the heavens opened and the Spirit of God came down like a dove, saying, "This is my beloved Son, with whom I am well pleased." From all over the world, Christians come to be baptized in these same desert waters. Miyaza Yohannes is another of the Ethiopian Christians here today. She's leading the group of pilgrims who've come to follow Jesus' example.
መጠመቅ ማለት ክርስቶስ ኢየሱስ በዮርዳኖስ ባህር ገብቶ እንደተጠመቀና መንፈስ ቅዱስ በኢየሱስ ላይ እንደወረደና ለስራ እንዳሰራው ዛሬ መጠመቅ ማለት ለኛ እዛ ሄደን የኢየሱስ ክርስቶስን ስራ እንድንሰራ ፍጹም ሙላት እንዲኖረን መንፈስ ቅዱስ በኃይል እንዲወርድ ነው። ይሄ ነው ትርጉሙ። አዎ የህይወት መለወጥ ነው ለኔ። ምክንያቱም ይሄንን ነው ማምነው የህይወት መለወጥ ነው።
ኢየሱስ ለዘላለም ጌታ ነው። አሜን። ኢየሱስ ለዘላለም ጌታ ነው።
As the day goes on, more and more pilgrims arrive, keen to experience baptism. The peace and quiet of the desert have melted away. Spiritual fervor is all around instead. But Qasr al-Yahud isn't just a place of religious significance. The river marks the dividing line between two countries, Israel and Jordan. From the far bank, Jordanian soldiers keep a watchful eye. Here, this desert of the soul is also a military zone. All around the baptism site, the signs of past conflict are plain to see. Located at the center of one of the world's religious flashpoints, Qasr al-Yahud has only recently been reopened to pilgrims. Work to build new facilities for them is ongoing, in what is essentially still a militarized zone. Security remains a real worry for the Israeli authorities. But as veteran tour guide Dikram Torassian knows, there's an economic imperative to make sure the desert remains open for business.
Now we dance. We dance the Ethiopian dance with the shoulders. Thank you.
הצליינות הנוצרי הייתה הבסיס של התיירות הישראלית. תמיד היה ותמיד יהיה. רוב התיירים שבאים לארץ הם צליינים.
I think that's an interesting thing.
This one piece will make 52 layers.
Watch on mobile devices or the big screen, all for free. No subscription required.
הפתיחה של אתר של קייסר היהוד, כמובן זה יעודד צליינות לארץ, ואני חושב הסיבה היחידה שמדינת ישראל החליטה לפתוח את האזור הצבאי זה שהירדנים שיפרו ופתחו את האזור שלהם, שזה ידוע בתור בריטניה של הירדן.
Touring the Judean Desert is one of the real highlights of a visit to the Holy Land. Crossing the wilderness is a network of modern highways which speed the tour buses with little delay from one ancient religious site to the next. But even pilgrims have to eat. A lunch stop is a chance for the Ethiopians to draw breath and reflect on the spiritual sustenance they've gained. Almaz Zabiya Yosef, a mother of 15 children, is in her 80s, and she experiences this desert journey in a special way. She's blind.
እግዚአብሔር የተቀበረበትን ላመሰግነው የሰጠኝን ፍሬዎቼን በጸጋ ስላሳደገልኝ ሳይታመሙ ሆስፒታል ሳይሆኑ እዚያ ያደረሰልኝን አምላክ ላመሰግነው። አሁንም እግዚአብሔር ብርሃኔን ይሰጠኛል ብዬ ሁልጊዜ ሰዎች ሲጠይቁኝ ከእግዚአብሔር ተስፋዬን አልቆርጥም። አሁንም ታምሩን ያሳየኛል፣ ያበራኛል።
This afternoon, another mode of transport and another high point for the pilgrims. This cable car on the outskirts of Jericho takes visitors to a desert peak which stands 350 meters above sea level. This is the Mount of Temptation, said to be the very spot where the devil confronted Jesus.
Thou shalt not be tempted to do jewelry. You're climbing Mount Temptation. So no temptation. Sunny side up.
While Christ fasted for 40 days, the devil tempted him to use his supernatural powers for selfish ends. One temptation was to satisfy his hunger by turning the stones of the desert into bread. Early Christian pilgrims searched for the place where Jesus overcame the devil's wiles. It was Queen Helena of Constantinople who, in the year 326, is supposed to have identified this as the location. Ever since, hermits have come to follow Jesus' example and live lives of extreme simplicity in caves on the mountain. In the 6th century, a Greek Orthodox monastery was built over the cave which is thought to have sheltered Christ for 40 nights. A pilgrimage here is meant to be a lesson in what the desert can do for the spirit. But modern tourism can sometimes feel more like a shopping trip. Those who believe that this is where Jesus fasted are now tempted to eat and drink. There's been no miracle cure today for Almaz Zabiya Yosef. Yet for those who have faith, coming away to the wilderness remains a far from empty experience.
This is natural rock.
እኔ እዛ ስንነከር ብዙዎች ሰዎች እንዳይጠራጠሩ እውነት እንደሆነ ፈውስ እንዳለ ነበር ማስረዳቸው። ፈውስ አለ እዚህ እና እመኑ እና ከማመን ጋር የተያያዘ ነው። ያቺ እናት ምናልባት ፊዚካሊ አይኗ ላይፈወስ ይችላል፣ ግን ውስጧ ስፒሪቹዋሊ መንፈሷ ሊታደስ ይችላልና ያንን ነው ያመንኩት።
As it always has done, this desert still nourishes the soul. It's also a place which presents physical challenges which many find hard to resist. Dawn above the Dead Sea. Despite temperatures that exceed 40 degrees Celsius, it's a mecca for adventurers looking to scale the cliffs. And where you have climbers, you need rescuers. Today, the Megillot Search and Rescue Team are preparing to plug 2 new volunteers. After weeks of training, this is the first chance for them to see if they're desert ready.
סיימנו קורס הכשרה של חילוץ בחבלים לפני 3 שבועות, וזה האימון הגדול הראשון במסגרת היחידה שאנחנו עושים מאז.
In charge is Mike Ott. As deputy head of the unit, it's his job to set the challenge and monitor the team's performance. From the moment the exercise begins, it's a race against the clock. The experienced volunteers are putting their own lives at risk, testing the rope skills of the rookies. Every knot and every belay has to be perfect. For trainee Yonu Shaina, it's an adrenaline rush.
יש אלמנט של פחד בעבודה, וזה אלמנט חשוב, כי מי שלא מפחד כנראה לא מבין את העבודה שהוא עושה.
For fellow newcomer Karima Oridershtik, there's also a lot to play for. A nurse in real life, today she must navigate a steep descent to reach her patients.
באותו רגע שאת נמצאת בתוך פעילות, חלק הבטיחותי הוא בכלל בצד, אתה עסוק בלהציל חיים.
For Karima, saving lives is a family affair.
והאמת היא שמי שהתחיל ביחידה זה הבן שלי, שהוא היה הראשון שהתחיל להיות ביחידה כשהוא היה מאוד צעיר, בן 16-17, ואחר כך בעלי התחיל להתנדב, ואז גם אני, ויש פעמים שאנחנו כולנו מתנדבים ביחד בתוך היחידה.
As deserts go, the Judean is small but deadly. Particularly to the thousands of people who venture here unprepared. Part of the problem is that this desert is so easily accessible. City dwellers can get here in a matter of minutes. It leaves them no time to adjust to the environment, as team leader Mike Ott knows only too well.
אני חושב שרוב החילוצים הם נובעים מאנשים שהם פשוט לא מבינים את המדבר. הם לא מבינים, הם לא עושים בדיקה לאן הם הולכים.
Just a week ago, this team worked all night to rescue a group of hikers lost and suffering from exhaustion and dehydration deep in the desert. But it's not just the lack of water people need to be prepared for. Sometimes, and without warning, there's water everywhere. During the springtime flash floods, torrents of rainwater flow from the Judean mountains through the valleys of the desert. The rocky limestone terrain cannot absorb the water, and it collects in deep, fast-flowing gullies. Thrill seekers who come to experience the drama are sometimes caught in the deluge.
והם לא יודעים שצריך לקחת חבלים, הם לא יודעים שהם צריכים לשחות, וכאלה שיוצאים לא יודעים לשחות.
מוטי! למה זה מתעכב?
When it comes to saving lives in the desert, Mike knows every second counts. A lesson these new recruits are learning fast. Once they reach their patient, They must act quickly to administer emergency treatment. The sooner they stabilize him, the sooner they can winch him to safety. That is, if the ropes hold. But they mustn't get ahead of themselves. As Mike knows, the most serious injuries happen to those who take the desert for granted.
אם לא נצמדים, לא נתפסים, לא קושרים כמו שצריך, אז אנשים נופלים, וזה הטעויות הגדולות יותר. אלה שהם מטיילים מאוד ותיקים ויודעים לטייל, אבל הם שוכחים שהמדבר גדול עליהם, שהם לא יכולים לעשות מה שהם רוצים, ושגרביטציה עובדת.
Finally, Mike gives the nod. The new volunteers have passed. Now they're fully part of this team and its sacred mission, to be ready to lay down their lives for strangers in distress. But there are some people who instinctively know how to survive in the Judean Desert. When the dust storms come, the Bedouin know how to see them out. Since time immemorial, Bedouins have lived in desert conditions like these. Sabha is a Bedouin wife and mother of 9 children. Her family are nomads, Arab shepherds, descendants of the Negev Bedouin, who migrated northwards from the Arabian Desert 3 centuries ago. Her life follows a daily pattern that hasn't changed much in all that time. She spends hours shaking this camel skin bag to make yogurt from goat's milk. Yogurt is a food the Bedouins brought north from the Arabian Peninsula, where they've used it as a staple for thousands of years.
اليوم أخذ من الصبح وأسوي لأولادي فطور أفطرهم وبعد الظهر الحين أشتغل في العشاء أسوي أكل أسوي خبز والحين يوجهن الغنمات أحلبهن وأحطن فيها المطربانات وأتعلل شوية للساعة 8 وبعد أحط راسي أنا. ها وش اللي أسوي وقتها صعب ولا مو صعب عايشين والحمد لله.
But now, their way of life here in Israel is under threat from forces even more powerful than the desert wind. The Bedouins are caught up in the bitter struggle over land between Jews and Palestinians, which overshadows the politics of the Middle East. There's huge pressure on them to move away from areas Israel regards as strategically important, but there's no obvious home for them elsewhere.
شدنا نساوي هذه عيشتنا وين نروح؟ وين دلك؟ ما في وين اروح يعني خلاص اولادي وغنمي وهانها عايشه. يعني وين اروح وين اروح؟ هذه منطقتي عايشه بيها.
The family have to range far and wide to find rough pasture and water for their livestock. Over the winter, this is their base. Just enough shelter beneath a small ridge for themselves and their animals. The name Bedouin means those in the desert. Feared by some for their ferocity, they are a proud people, inheritors of a nomadic way of life that's grown out of harshness and has stood the test of time. But Sabha's husband, Ali, sees all that coming to an end with the current generation.
البدو كان بيكرموا بيضربوا بسيف بيطعموا بشرف بحياة بخجل عندهم ذوق عندهم إنسانية عندهم عزازة نفس اليوم كل العالم ما فيش أنا بخاف.
Even here in the desert, Bedouin families feel the pressure of modern life encroaching on them.
لا ما بيمشي عمل مشانا، لأن الحين صار علم وصار مدارس. إحنا كنا جاهلية، لا قراية ولا علم. زمان أنا ما بقرأ ولا بكتب، أبوي وأمي وكلهم ما مجرى.
Already, many young Bedouins are part of the Palestinian education system. They learn about the desert in a different way from their mothers and fathers. Today, the shrine of Nebi Musa is welcoming a succession of school visits. In Islamic tradition, this is a significant place of pilgrimage, the grave of Moses, a prophet revered by both Jews and Muslims. But compared with the well-developed sites holy to Jews and Christians, this shrine is starved of funding, according to local leader Abul Qasim.
إن هذا المكان يعني كان دائما للثقافة والتعليم والتربية والإرشاد. المعلمين تخرجوا من هذا المكان، ولكن الآن يعني بصيغة الاحتلال أصبح المكان ليس عنده إمكانية أن يأتي بأي نوع من الطلاب أو يعمل أي معهد تعليمي للمكان.
With more money, they could develop a proper educational center here, one that could really embrace Bedouin children from the hills all around. The real history of this desert is something that's being lost because there's nowhere to pass it on.
ولكن الأمل قريب إنه يكون هذا المكان مهيأ للشباب الذي يعيش حول هذه المنطقة، خاصة شباب البدو. يعني إنه ما زال في بدو يعيشوا كثيرين حول هذه المنطقة وبتغلبوا في سفريات بعيدة للتعليم، والأمل أن يكون هذا المكان مهيأ لهم في المستقبل إن شاء الله، بحيث تصير في دورات تعليمية الحمد لله رب العالمين، يكون يخرج يعني المثقفين والعلماء والصالحين من هذا المكان كما كان سابقا.
السلام عليكم ورحمة الله.
A new day. And for Sabha and her Bedouin family, a change in the weather. Another year has turned. It's time to pack up the winter quarters and move on. They don't need a calendar to tell them this. Knowing when and where to move is a Bedouin instinct developed over millennia of desert life.
لقينا عشان دار الصيف بدنا نبرد فوق شوية يعني. هناك دار المشتى وهن دار الصيف. نقعد هن 6 أشهر وتحت 6 أشهر، بس تفوت الشتوية تخلص نرحل في شهر 5. والحمد لله رب العالمين نبرد هان عشان أبرد للغنم وأبرد للأولاد وأبرد لنا إحنا، وأحسن يعني هان شوية من تحت شوبة وحم يطعي حم تحت. الحمد لله رب العالمين.
Bedouins still follow their instincts, but these days their scope for living as true nomads is severely restricted. The Israeli state has deliberately encouraged the Bedouin to settle in towns. Grazing restrictions hem them in. There's pressure on their land from new Jewish settlements. Now, they simply can't sustain themselves without connections to urban life.
جيبها من البلد من غرب على التراكتر. على التراكتر جيبها من البلد من غرب. وهذا ايش اسمه العلف نجيبه من عند التاجر من تقوع. جايبيت لحم غسي معنا والميه من تقوع. اخذ التنك باسبوع تنك 6 كيل 3 قد واحنا شربنا وهنا ويست.
The nomadic traditions of the Bedouin, it seems, are fast approaching their end. Schools and shops are shaping their children's desires. But in these lives, a faith persists. But the desert is the source of a good life. There's more honor here, they say, than in all the wealth and consumerism of the modern world.
وربنا يجيب مطر وبنحرث وبنحصد ويسووا الغنم تاكل من الشعير والعرب والناس ياكل من القمح. شو بنسوي؟ امر الله بتنفذ. فاحنا نقول اليوم ما ظل بركه، يعني معك 1000 شيكل بتخش سوق طاره ولا لا؟ بيطير اللي زمان في بركة وفي خير وفي نعمة الله وإيش بنسوي؟
If it's for a blessing that tourists come here, perhaps it's not surprising that they're very happy to spend their shekels on ways to remember it. Jerusalem is full of tourist bazaars, hawking mementos of a pilgrimage to the Holy Land. Modern marketing seems at odds with a religion whose founder threw the money changers out of the temple. But that story only goes to show how ancient the link between selling and faith is. Other shops offer something that's more authentic. Genuine archaeological finds dating back to biblical times. Oil lamps first lit when Jesus was alive. Coins like the widow's mite, worth next to nothing back then, and used by Christ, the Bible says, to illustrate an eternal truth. Poor people giving a little means so much more than the rich donating from their plenty. Now the widow's mite and everything else here is worth a pretty penny. For owner Nidal Ibrahim Omar Hrub, antiques are in his blood.
المحل هذا قبل 50 سنة كان قاعد فيه سيدي، فتحه حوالي 50 سنة، بعديها توفى، قاعد فيه أبوي قبل 10 سنين، فتحه أنتيكة يعني نفس الشغلة. ما بعد أنا بشتغل مع أبوي نتعلم الصنعة يعني الشغلة هي الأنتيكة.
Stores like these have to be registered with the Department of Antiquities, and the trade is strictly regulated.
بالنسبة لهاي القطعة ما بقدرش أبيعها إلا يكون عليها الرقم هذا. كل المحل موجود عليه أرقام زي هيك. ولازم يعني بالنسبة للمحل لما بدي يجي عندي الزبون لازم أفرجيه يشوف الرخصة إنه قانوني 100% ولازم أعطيه سيرتيفيكات.
There's a good reason for that, as archaeologist Yuval Peleg knows only too well. Today, he's out in the desert, looking for evidence of a Byzantine monastery which stood on this site 1,500 years ago. It was just one of scores of monasteries built here in a tradition started by monks from Turkey in the 4th century. The idea was to come to be alone with God in these isolated places, far from the temptations of the city. Their legacy is a desert rich in archaeology. So rich that it's impossible to explore everything that's of interest.
יש אלפי אתרים בארץ ישראל, אי אפשר לחפור את כל האתרים מכל מיני סיבות. אחד זה סיבות תקציביות, זה לוקח תקציבים מאוד מאוד גדולים. זה עניין של זמן, גם אם נתחיל לחפור עכשיו את כל האתרים זה לעולם לא ייגמר. וגם אחרי חפירה, גם אם חפרנו משהו, אחר כך צריך לעשות שימור, צריך לשמור על המקום הזה כדי שהוא לא ייהרס.
But the biggest problem archaeologists face is looting. Thieves raid the desert for its ancient treasures, and they seem to have no difficulty in profiting from their booty.
שודדי עתיקות בעצם, הארכיאולוגיה לא מעניינת אותם. המבנה, ההיסטוריה של המבנה לא מעניינת אותם, מה שמעניין אותם זה החפצים שאפשר לקחת ולמכור.
High-profile archaeological finds like the Dead Sea Scrolls have drawn global attention to this desert. Hoping to uncover relics that might be just as valuable, organized gangs come here to dig at night.
החיפוש הוא אחרי המטבעות עם מגלי מתכות או מערות קבורה שיש בהם בדרך כלל ממצאים שהנקברים הונחו ליד הנקברים מכלי זכוכית וכלי חרס וכלי מתכת ותכשיטים וחרוזים, כל דבר שאפשר למכור אותו בשוק העתיקות ששווה כסף, ולפעמים זה דברים ששווים המון המון כסף.
A single find can fetch as much as $300,000 on the black market. So archaeologists and legitimate dealers find themselves united in trying to stamp out a lucrative trade that's robbing the desert of its antiquities. The archaeology of the desert isn't all to do with Christian sites. This is Masada, a fortress set on a high peak above the Dead Sea. For many Jews, it's a place of huge significance. According to the 1st century historian Josephus, it was the Jewish King Herod the Great who fortified this desert hilltop. 100 years later, a generation after the time of Christ, the Jews rose up against Roman occupation. The revolt failed, but it was here that a group of Jews made a doomed last stand. The Romans laid siege to Masada. When they finally broke through, Josephus says, they discovered how devoted Jews could be to their faith. Rather than bend the knee to Rome, the defenders, almost 1,000 of them, had committed mass suicide. Masada draws Jewish visitors from all over the world. The Chernins have traveled from the United States to celebrate a big family occasion, the bat mitzvah of daughter Tori.
We plan to be here for the bat mitzvah because, we live in the States. It's sometimes hard to remember who you are, and trying to teach Tori to remember who she is, which in any religion, in any walk of life, gets harder and harder. There's so much noise that drowns out sometimes in society who you are. The silence is deafening. It's palpable. You can feel what was here, and to be connected to that is magical. You don't get that in many places in the world. The story ultimately is a sad story, but it's not just the ending of the story, it's the redemption, it's the struggle, it's the fight, it's the faith of the Jews that came here to live as Jews.
In celebrating her bat mitzvah, 12-year-old Tori is undergoing a religious rite of passage. It's the age at which Jewish girls are considered old enough to understand God's laws and to be accountable for their own actions. Marking her coming of age here is something Tori will never ever forget.
It's kind of from seeing city life to desert life. I've never seen anything like this. I mean, who gets to come to Israel for their bat mitzvah on top of a really, really, really great mountain? Who gets to just enjoy the sights and the views? Who gets to do that? That makes it special for me. In the desert, it's just so great.
Other tourists come for less elevated reasons. Masada looks down on the Dead Sea, the lowest point in any landmass on the planet, 425 meters below sea level. River water flows into the sea but can't flow out. It simply evaporates, leaving a salty residue that's built up over the millennia. A third of this water is dissolved salt. It's 6 times saltier than the ocean, and no fish can survive in it. It's dense. Famously, you don't swim here. You float. The healing properties of Dead Sea salt and mud have always drawn visitors to this place. These days, it's a multi-million-dollar business. Some of the world's finest hotels, luxury spa treatments. The mud of the Dead Sea is enriched with minerals essential to healthy skin. It's used to treat psoriasis and eczema, as well as arthritis. Therapy or relaxation, Dead Sea mud packs are famous. Legend has it that one person who came here to use them was Cleopatra. It's good to de-stress, but the bosses of this tourist industry are far from relaxed. Their livelihood depends on the Dead Sea, and the Dead Sea is disappearing. For decades, water from the River Jordan, which feeds it from the north, has been siphoned off for irrigation, factories and homes. Over 1 billion cubic meters of water a year used to flow into the sea. Today, it's less than 100 million. The vital flow has turned into a trickle, and the sea level is dropping fast. These markers have been placed at the shore's edge year by year to keep track of how rapidly the sea is shrinking. Every year, the water depth decreases by as much as 1 meter. At the same time, new water-intensive industries have appeared, accelerating the Dead Sea's decline. The north of the sea has become separated from the southern end, and dikes have been built across the whole of the southern portion. They've created huge salt evaporation pans, which extract carnallite. The mineral is processed to make potassium chloride, a chemical used in fertilizers, medicine, and food. The raw materials for magnesium metal are also produced here. It all has the effect of reducing water levels even further. And nowhere is this more evident than Ein Gedi Spa, which used to advertise that it was right on the water. But dropping sea levels means it's now almost 2 kilometers away from the shore. If you want to bathe, you have to be driven there. It's exasperating for spa manager Yonatan Elbaz.
עם השנים, חוף הים, הוא היה ממש מגיע עד קצה הכביש, כמו שרואים טיפה יותר דרומה מפה. ממש, איפה שאנחנו עומדים כאן עכשיו, הכל היה מים. אנשים היו יורדים איפה שהדקלים והיו מתרחצים במים. בעצם בשנים האחרונות, ב-20 שנים האחרונות, בגלל מפעלי ים המלח שבדרום, הם שואבים את כל הים והים מצטמק והתייבש כמעט לחלוטין. במשך 20 שנה איבדנו כמעט 2 קילומטר של כביש, של ים, סליחה.
If no action is taken, experts predict that the water level will drop by a further 100 to 150 meters, and many see no end to the process. Yonatan is not alone in fearing that before long, this desert will lose its sea altogether.
אני מאמין שעוד 20-30 שנה כבר לא יישאר לנו ים פה, זה יהיה שלולית אחת קטנה, ומעבר לרמה האישית שלנו, של העסק שלי או בכלל, זה בעיה שהיא לאומית ועולמית, כי אין ים המלח שני בעולם שלנו.
Over millions of years, a natural equilibrium here created a unique desert environment. In a matter of generations, that balance seems to have been completely overturned. What's certainly true is that there's a new and deadly danger on these banks. The drop in sea level has been followed by changes to the groundwater. Along the shore, layers of brine that used to underpin the topsoil have been flushed out. Below the ground, cavities form, then collapse, dramatically and without warning. The gaping depressions are called sinkholes. For decades, geologist Eli Raz has been studying what's happening on land as the water level drops.
כשהגעתי לכאן בשנות ה-70,
אז קו החוף היה ממש פה, הים היה פה. לא היה זכר כמובן ולא סימן לבולענים. הבולען הראשון הופיע בסוף שנות ה-80, ואז נוכחנו לדעת שיש עוד בולענים בסביבה, אבל לא היה מדובר על יותר מכמה עשרות. במשך הזמן בולענים התרבו והתרבו, והיום אנחנו מדברים על אלפי בולענים לאורך ים המלח.
Every few days, new holes appear, and each one represents danger. Ellie has begun to map them and to try to get a grasp on the precise conditions which cause them. Strangely, Ellie came to the desert to get away from life as a geologist. It was idealism which brought him here. In the late 1950s, he joined a kibbutz, an agricultural cooperative.
כמובן שעם הזמן החקלאות התפתחה, והגידול המוביל בחקלאות של נאות מדבר זה התמרים. נאות מדבר ותמר זה הולך ביחד.
The Judean date palm has been cultivated in this desert oasis for thousands of years. Although next to no rain falls here, natural springs provide water for crops and plants. The kibbutz today sees itself as the successor to the biblical settlement of Ein Gedi, famous for its vineyards and palm trees. Eli grew up in a much more fertile part of Israel, but something here spoke to his soul.
המשמעות של המדבר ליהודים היא מאוד מאוד עמוקה. העם היהודי נוצר במדבר. עכשיו, באופן אישי, אני נולדתי לא במדבר, אבל פה אתה רואה את הקשר בין הדברים. וזה באופן אישי, זה הדבר שחשוב לי.
But Eli realized the modern-day mission to replant and restore the date groves was now in peril. Sinkholes were rapidly undermining the cultivated land. So to safeguard the project in which the kibbutz had invested so much, Eli returned to surveying the local geology. And that all but cost him his life. In 2003, he was out alone checking new sinkhole activity. A massive chasm suddenly opened beneath his feet. He came to at the bottom of a hole 9 meters deep.
לגמרי לא. אבל כשקצת התאוששתי, הרגשתי שאני קבור בערימת מפולת, והייתי די בפאניקה, די נפחד. גם היה לי קשה לצאת מערימת המפולת הזאת. ובסופו של דבר, כשישבתי על ראש ערימת המפולת בתחתית הבור, התחלתי לחשוב מה אני עושה. החשש הכי גדול שלי זה שתהיה עוד מפולת, וזה הסוף של הסיפור. ואז מצאתי בכיס שלי גלויה. והחלטתי שאני כותב על הגלויה כמה שאני יכול, נפרד מהאנשים הקרובים אליי.
Soon Eli had written on every inch of the postcard. But it would be another 14 hours before rescue arrived.
אז נזכרתי שיש לי בתרמיל שהייתי חגור בו ונפלתי יחד איתו, יש לי גליל של נייר טואלט. והוצאתי את הגליל הזה וכתבתי עליו כל שעות האור שהיו לי כתבתי עליו.
Back in his office, Eli still keeps private the testament he wrote that day. Special messages to his closest loved ones. For all that he knew at the time, they were his last words to them. But though he's learned caution, nothing keeps him from measuring the environmental damage that's happening here. As a geologist, Eli knows that in this desert of the soul, the landscape shapes material fortunes too. The sinkholes have arrested the economic growth of the whole region. Major tourist attractions like Masada have escaped lightly, with investment in infrastructure like this cable car system and a gleaming new visitor center. And sections are being repaired on stretches of road which are now too dangerous to drive. But many businesses are struggling, communities are failing, and residents are being driven away by the lack of work. And for Eli, the future of his oasis in the desert is worth so much that he's willing to go on risking his life for it. The Judean Desert. Harsh, deceptive, deadly. Here there's nothing soft, nothing easy. This wilderness strips away distraction and pretension. So it's always been a land of deep contemplation, of spiritual yearning. It challenges us to fathom the bedrock of existence. There are those who call it the desert of the soul. But this pilgrim's paradise is also a theater of conflict and struggle. It's a place where people trade on tourism and profiteer from the legacy religion has left here. In the name of progress, this promised land suffers terrible harm. And yet beyond all our shortcomings, the Judean Desert still calls on us to look within ourselves to find a better nature and to lift our eyes in search of a better future here on this earth. Deserts, the driest places on earth, covering more than a fifth of all the world's landmass. As dangerous to life as the highest peak or the coldest glacier. But in these harsh and barren wastelands, nature endures. People have lived in the desert since the beginning of time. Resilient and resourceful, they have developed unique cultures and deep spiritual bonds with these arid lands. But the modern world of commerce and industry is encroaching on the desert, claiming its resources, changing the delicate balance of life. Now, more than ever, desert people must adapt to survive. This series tells their story of struggle and endeavor, of humanity's continuing relationship with the most challenging places on Earth. There's just one word that's needed to describe the Atacama. Dry. Parts of the desert are completely arid, virtually sterile. Not even bacteria survive. The Atacama stretches for 1,000 kilometers along the shores of Chile and Peru. Coastal mountains to the west and the giant Andes to the east block out the rain clouds. In some places, it hasn't rained for 4 centuries. And yet, miraculously, people have found ways to live here. The human face of the Atacama expresses joy as well as a simple determination to survive. But there's a darker side to this desert story. The Atacama is so dry, it preserves like nowhere else the dirty secrets of its ancient past. And there's no hiding place here for the evidence of much more recent terrors. Today, water has become a precious, private commodity. Mining corporations buy it up. Residents go thirsty. Yet these barren, moistureless plains may give us our best chance of finding water and life billions of miles away. A place awash with contradictions. This is the Atacama, the driest desert. Here, in the giant shadow of the Andes, is where the high desert and the story of human survival begins. Benita Panire is a survivor. For 60 years, she's farmed an isolated patch of land in these mountains.
Vivía con mi mamá y mi mamá falleció el año pasado y me quedé sola, pues yo no tengo hijos, no me he casado, nada, soy sola.
3,000 meters above sea level, life for Benita is a daily battle with the elements.
En el invierno hace mucho viento, mucha tierra, que hace mucho frío y uno, no sé, ahí es un poco difícil.
Benita's animals are her lifeline, providing milk and meat and something to trade. She has no electricity and no running water. She used to walk several kilometers to draw supplies from a mountain spring. But these days, the journey is too much for her. She's forced to depend on the generosity of neighbors. Even so, she has to eke out every last drop.
Vienen todas las semanas y me dejan agua. Dura como una semana, 2 semanas, o más de 15 días, 20 días, según la cantidad que uso.
Benita's most dependable helper is her nephew, René. René feels a family responsibility to lend a hand as Benita's only close relative. As it happens, it's also a civic duty for him. He's the head man of the nearest village, Aikina. Life there can also be a struggle.
Hay varias cosas que nos preocupa. Lo que veíamos, por ejemplo, en la calidad de vida que tiene nuestra gente acá. Estamos a pleno siglo XXI. Y todavía podemos ver, digamos, donde nuestra gente vive tal cual como un poco como la prehistoria, sin tener agua potable, digamos, mediante cañería, sin tener alcantarillado, sin más bien usando a campo libre.
Sprawling across the hillside, Aikina looks for all the world like a substantial settlement. In fact, its permanent population is no more than 70. Most of these buildings are holiday homes. For much of the year, they lie empty, until it's party time. Aikina's festival lasts for days. The festivities honor the Lady of Guadalupe. The story goes that the Virgin Mary appeared on this very spot in 1646. But no one seems to be quite certain of the exact date the miracle happened. And some say the Virgin showed herself more than once. The people of Aikina staged several celebrations, marking one of the most holy events in its history. Family ties are strong here, and everybody has a part to play. René's aunt makes the popcorn. It's a real feast for everyone. But this isn't just a little family occasion. At the height of festive season during the first week of September, the town's population swells to 75,000. Catholicism takes center stage. But religion here is enriched with customs that were already sacred when Christianity arrived with the Spanish conquistadors. The villagers are descendants of the Aymara, indigenous people who have farmed in the shadow of the Andes for more than 2,000 years. The costumes, the music, the dances all date back to an era before Europeans ever set foot here. So too does the secret of how the Aymara managed to establish themselves here. Eight kilometers east of the village lie the ancient ruins of Topain. The evidence here is of an Aymaran village that's more than 1,000 years old. In those days, the desert was even drier than it is today. Yet archaeologists like Cesar Pacero are finding increasing proof that even through the super drought, the population here not only survived, it thrived.
Los habitantes de Topain, un grupo de unas pocas familias, fue capaz de aprovechar de forma súper eficiente y muy eficaz la muy escasa agua que había en este lugar.
The keys to success were these rock channels, the arteries of a sophisticated water distribution system. The irrigation watered these specially built terraces, nourishing all the crops the Aymara needed. But with no rainfall, where did the water come from? The answer is in the very Andean peaks that block the rain clouds from reaching the desert. The summits catch what little precipitation there is and redirect it to glacial springs and underground rivers. The Aymara were able to pinpoint these hidden sources. By building simple dams, they could even store water for when the streams ran dry.
La presa tenía una salida en esta parte de acá, que vemos por aquí, un agujero que habrían tapado o abierto en el momento en el que necesitasen cerrar o abrir el paso de agua, que realmente esta gente fue capaz de diseñar una forma de producción y un modo de vida tan eficientes que todavía hoy siguen siendo válidos y que por lo tanto eran entonces tan modernos como lo pueden ser hoy en día.
1,000 years later, the precious knowledge has not been entirely lost. Today, on the hill slopes beneath Aikina, there's a hidden oasis. Terraces of vegetation are irrigated by water channeled from a mountain spring, using techniques pioneered a millennium ago. And the valley below shows what's possible when you husband scarce resources with skill and ingenuity. In turning the desert green, the people of Aikina are also celebrating their Aymaran heritage. There's plenty to give thanks for. But even at party time, René can't be entirely free of worry. His family has lived in Aikina as far back as their memory goes. But there's a big change on the horizon. A change that René fears could rob his children of a future here. A few kilometers to the west, there are more ruins. The remains of a village that once thrived like Aikina. René is keen for his son to understand what happened here.
Esto antiguamente, todo esto lo que tú ves acá, era una vega. Acá habían llamos, corderos, habían cabras, habían parinas, patos, de todo.
Snow meltwater from underground streams was what kept this valley fertile. Today, that water is being redirected for industrial use and in massive quantities. Every hour, wells like this one pump millions of liters down the pipeline. All that's left is the little that leaks out. René's nightmare is that one day big business will come for the water that keeps his village green.
Yo desde acá, donde tú ves, con todo este desierto que tú ves acá, yo te invito a ti a que tú seas un cuidador y seas un defensor de corazón de nuestras tierras. ¿Ah? ¿Estás de acuerdo?
Sí.
Ya. Ya, hijo.
But the challenge may be far bigger than a boy could imagine. His home sits right next to one of the richest mineral fields on the planet. The ground may be parched of water, but it's full of precious metals. Gold, silver, iron, copper, lithium. All these have been laid down here by geological processes unique to the desert environment. Extracting the mineral wealth can be hugely profitable. That's why more than 700 mines are now operating in the Atacama. Chile is the world's biggest producer of copper, and 25% of the world's lithium lies beneath its surface rock and salt lakes. Lithium is an essential component in many familiar industrial products, like car batteries. Without it, the modern world would outrun itself. But the extreme desert environment that forged the Atacama's underground wealth is also the biggest obstacle to extracting it. Mining requires water, and on an industrial scale. And water, of course, is the one resource that's in short supply. This is Kiawa. According to official records, it's the driest town on Earth. Natives of Kiawa can only dream of rain on their faces. The town's dusty weather gauge hasn't registered measurable rainfall for 40 years.
Yo me voy a morir, tampoco voy a ver. Bueno, tampoco va a caer un milímetro de agua.
Pero como le dije, yo tengo la esperanza.
Bueno, quédese con esa esperanza, ¿no?
Esperaremos.
It's just as well Andres Palape has something else to occupy his time. He keeps the only hotel in town. Each time a guest checks in, there's a special conversation to be had.
Aquí en Quillagua el agua se relaciona porque es poca el agua que nos dan. Y yo con el agua que estoy recibiendo no se puede gastar más allá de 42 litros de agua diario.
On a daily basis, the residents of Quillagua use 20 times less water than people in the United States. The water they are allowed to use has to be brought here by truck.
No hay mucha agua. Aquí el agua es bien concreta. Hay que ocupar lo justo y necesario.
Kiawa fights to survive, despite the record-breaking drought and the dryness of the landscape all around. Remarkably, There's evidence of human settlement here stretching back 10,000 years and more, longer than almost anywhere else in South America. An ancient civilization known as the Chinchurro flourished here. The landscape itself bears the evidence. The dry desert has preserved this rock art, prehistoric statements in stone, still visible thousands of years later. And there's other proof of ancient human presence here in Kiawa. Proof that's dramatic and macabre. Mummies. Vessels of communication between the living and the spirit world. The ancients painted their dead and mummified them with open eyes and mouths. In magic rituals, they were said to see this world and the next, and to speak to both. The mummies have been dated as roughly 2,000 years old. In any other museum, precious finds like these would have to be preserved in a dehumidified environment. But caretaker Felisa Sosa isn't concerned about that. She knows the atmosphere here is so exceptionally dry that nothing rots.
Es una niñita. Ella tenía el pelito en la boca, pues se le sale muy rebelde el pelo, se le cae. Ahí está.
One body in Felisa's collection has a quite separate history. This man is from Asia. He died just a century and a half ago. He was a slave, a Chinese coolie, tricked into crossing the Pacific and forced to work in mining or farming. Tests show he had an enlarged liver. It's probable his masters paid him nothing but alcohol. His body was abandoned where he died. The desert did the rest, preserving his body. Graphic evidence of Kiawa's slave trading past. In choosing to trade here, his 19th century masters were no fools. Kiawa was an oasis. The life-giving water flowed in the form of the river Loa. Fed by Andean glaciers, the Loa is the main watercourse in the Atacama. At 440 kilometers, it's Chile's longest river. For thousands of years, the waters of the Loa supported a thriving agricultural society in this valley. The signs here still read, "Welcome to the spa town of Kiawa." But the reality today is very different. This evening, Andres is dining with his brother Miguel. It's a long-standing family tradition. When it began, they used to feast on local delicacies like freshwater shrimp. Nowadays, the menu is much more limited.
Se comía el camarón frito, se comía en picante, se comía en cocido con mayonesa, se tomaba sopa de camarones, ¿qué más había? Gallina, cualquier gallina. Conejo también, hay el criadero de conejos. Todo eso también se terminó. Hoy día todo esto hay que comerlo congelado no. Por eso que mi mamá ahora está delgada, porque no come camarones, ni pejerreyes, ni gallinas frescas. Sí, ¿no? Me encanta.
Today's limited choice is due to the huge environmental change that Miguel has witnessed.
Bueno, en mis manos tengo yo unos recuerdos del año 82 como hasta el 87 más o menos. Y acá tengo donde este mismo campo que estamos hoy día parados.
When Miguel was young, the River Loa flowed freely through his parents' farmland. The family grew crops, alfalfa and maize, and they fished for shrimp. the sweet river variety for which Kiowa used to be famous.
Pillé unos más grandes, era así, inmenso. La tijera, era así la tijera, era inmenso. Eso pillamos con chapa de golpe. Con uno queda listo, uno va al desayuno. Un buen desayuno con cebolla frita, era delicioso, muy bueno.
Kiowa's demise was swift. In the late 1980s, the government reassigned 2/3 of the river's water for industrial use. A decade later, much worse was to follow. 125 kilometers upstream from Kiowa is one of the world's largest copper mines. Run by government-owned Codelco, it's the only mine in the region that uses toxic compounds of xanthate in the metal extraction process. Tests proved that in 1997 and in the year 2000, levels of xanthate and mercury in the river Loa were extremely high.
Cuando llegó una contaminación, sonaron todos, se murió todo lo que hay a su alrededor, mató el agua. Como me explicaba, como petróleo, así como, pero botaba una espuma, tenía mucha espuma esa agua.
Arsenic levels were several thousand times higher than normal. It was a fatal dose.
Tanto los camarones como los pejerreyes, la alfalfa murió en ese tiempo. Los animales no se les podía dar de esa agua, que era el agua dulce, hasta que pasara el proceso de la contaminación.
What happened next sealed Kiowa's fate. Developers offered to relieve people's burdens by buying their polluted water. In Chile, water is a private commodity. Even in the Atacama, people can sell their usage rights to the highest bidder. Unable to farm the polluted and unproductive lands, many in Kiowa felt they had little choice but to sell up and leave.
Entonces no es que puedan echarle la culpa que vendió la gente el agua. Mi padre fue uno de los que vendió también sus derechos de agua.
75% of the town sold their polluted water to the industrialists. Now, Kiowa is dying. Almost all the young have left in search of better opportunities in the city. But the story isn't unique to Kiowa. Boom and bust is a recurring theme in the history of the Atacama. The desert is full of ghost towns. Settlements that prospered with the discovery of mineral wealth, only to be abandoned once their resources had been plundered. But the Atacama is far from being mined out. Millions of years ago, this desert was covered by a huge inland sea. Over time, the boundless sunshine of the desert dried out the waters, leaving a crystal residue. With no rainfall to dissolve the crystals, other sediments were deposited directly on top. Over many millions of years, huge beds of subterranean salt formed. Sala Grande de Tarapacá is an open-cast mine on the desert coast. It's one of the purest sources of natural salt on the planet. The deposits here are 5 kilometers wide and 45 kilometers long. There are billions of metric tons of salt here. This one mine alone is big enough to satisfy the world's demand for salt for the next 200 years. other mineral brought the Atacama sudden wealth and sudden ruin. This is the town of Chacabuco. It was built in 1924 to facilitate the mining of one of the most lucrative compounds ever dug from the sand: sodium nitrate, otherwise known as Chile saltpeter. Formed over 20 million years by volcanic activity, saltpeter was first mined in the Atacama in the 1820s. It soon became a key ingredient in products like fertilizers and gunpowder. During the First World War, as demand boomed, hundreds of mines and processing plants worked the desert. Industrial towns were thrown up to house workers. Railways were laid down to transport the nitrate powder to the coast for export. In Chacabuco's heyday, Chile was producing 2/3 of all the world's fertilizer. It was hard labor, but the workers flooded in. The town boasted the best amenities money could buy: a plaza, a theater, a hospital, and a church, said to be one of the most beautiful in northern Chile. But the glory days weren't to last. In the 1920s, Germany developed a synthetic saltpeter. It proved just as effective as the natural thing at a fraction of the cost. By the 1930s, the industry here was in dramatic decline. Chile's economy collapsed. Today, the Atacama is littered with abandoned saltpeter towns, nearly 200 of them. But for Chacabuco, economic collapse wasn't the end of the story. The ghost town would be resurrected in a new and dark chapter of Chile's history. On September the 11th, 1973, General Augusto Pinochet ousted Chile's democratic government in a military coup. Backed by the United States, Pinochet moved quickly to consolidate his grip on power by annihilating his socialist opponents. The new regime turned the empty houses of Chacabuco into a concentration camp for political dissidents. "1,800 prisoners were incarcerated here. Students, teachers, professionals, laborers, anyone considered an enemy of the state. In all, under Pinochet, 250,000 people were detained. Behind the barbed wire, under the watchtowers, torture and violence were meted out. But it's taken a lifetime and a group of resolute women to uncover the truth about the most terrible atrocities. They took place outside the camp gates, witnessed only by a guilty few. Violeta Berrios lives in Calama, a city deep in the desert, alone with her 5 dogs.
Pero son mi vida. A mí me llenan la vida ellos. No sé qué haría si no tuviera mi hijo.
Violeta's life wasn't always like this. 40 years ago, she was a young woman in love.
Si era un moreno muy lindo. Marión era un hombre común y corriente, trabajador, pertenecía a un partido de izquierda. y eso lo llevó a la tumba.
In September 1973, a Chilean army squad was heading for Calama. They would become known as the Caravan of Death. Led by Army Brigadier General Sergio Ariano Stark, the squad descended on 4 cities in northern Chile. Their mission? To identify socialist sympathizers. Mario was one of those who was targeted.
Hija, venga. Mario fue detenido el 30 de septiembre. Había una subcomisaría y ahí llevaban a todos los detenidos y ahí los torturaban y hacían todo lo que querían. Yo no lo había visto desde el 30 hasta el 13 o 14 de octubre que lo vi. Era un guiñapo humano. O sea, había perdido todo el peso que tenía. Tenía tajitos en la cara, en la frente, en los brazos. Y yo nunca me olvidara, por Dios, Mario, le digo yo, ¿cómo estás? Me dieras el cuerpo, me dijo.
Violetta would never see Mario again. The Caravan of Death had got its man.
Fui a la cárcel a preguntar por Mario y ya Mario no estaba, eran como las 6 de la tarde. Y de ahí me fui ante esta familia, la familia Rodríguez. Cuando llego a la casa de la familia Rodríguez, siento llantos, pataletas, gritos y golpeé suavemente y me dice, los mataron, los mataron.
Mario and 22 others from Calama had been murdered. Shot or stabbed, their bodies were thrown into a mass grave in the desert. Grieving wives, mothers, sisters, daughters were desperate to discover their fate. Their anguish forged an unbreakable bond between them all. Meeting in secret, they became known as the Women of Calama. 40 years later, they still come together every week to share their memories. Lorena was just a small child when her father disappeared. She sought comfort from friends, only to find that Pinochet's terror had thrown up barriers of distrust.
Todo así se confabulaba en todas las familias. ¿Cómo te llamas tú? Ah, ¿y tu papá de qué murió fusilado? Ah, fusilado. Y ahí el linde, al tiro. Por lo menos más de uno de nosotros nos pasó esa situación. Fue terrible.
But the women of Calama would not be intimidated. In secret, they resolved to find the bodies of their loved ones. Just months after the murders, they began to search the desert. It was 17 long years before they found what they were looking for. They dug up the mass grave expecting to exhume bodies. All that they found were fragments.
Ellos fueron enterrados en una parte y después los sacaron. Y nosotros lo que hemos encontrado son restos de restos. O sea, no es gran cosa. Son pedacitos, son vértebras, son falanges, uñas, piezas molares.
Today, this memorial marks the exact spot where their search ended. But in a desert that preserves the dead like nowhere else, a mystery remained. Why did they fail to find whole bodies in the sand? Eventually, in 2007, more than 30 years after the men disappeared, witnesses came forward to explain the mystery. the women finally learned the truth. A few months after the executions, realizing the desert would preserve the evidence of their crimes, the military had returned to the mass grave. They dug up the human remains using bulldozers. They loaded them into a transport plane and dumped them into the sea. We may never know precisely what inhumanities happened here that night. Yet the women of Calama are relentless in their search for answers.
Pero es que es angustiante. Yo ya, o sea, me encuentro superada esta situación ya. O sea, pero hay que seguir haciendo las cosas nomás. Aunque los sentimientos sean otros, pero hay momentos que no se puede. Yo ya no puedo ya. Ya, chao.
Everywhere, the Atacama tests the human heart. But the challenges are at their most extreme at its western edge. The world's driest desert sits right next to a vast body of water. Along the Pacific coast, a string of small settlements are fighting for survival. At the edge of the continent, communities like Chanavaya are so remote they can feel as though they've been forgotten. The river Loa sweeps into the sea here, or would do if it had not been so depleted by industry upstream. What little water does trickle through is heavily polluted. So Chanavaya has to depend on water brought in by truck, and for weeks the vital delivery simply hasn't shown up.
Lo más importante, el agua. El camión no puede estar más de 10 días sin venir a la población, porque eso me va a obligar a declarar la población insalubre.
Matters are desperate, and the authorities aren't returning their calls.
No sé, pues es increíble.
But today sees an electioneering visit by the district mayor. Electoral coincidence or not, earlier this morning, for the first time in 27 days, the water truck finally arrived. Chanavaya needs champions. Unfortunately, it has a very gutsy one. Sonia Moreno counts herself as lucky to have grown up here. It was a community that valued education, and inspired by her coastal childhood, she went on to graduate as a marine biologist. But now she's left a successful career in the city to join the fight for Chanavaya's future.
Esta es una caleta muy emblemática en esta región. Es una caleta que no tiene problemas sociales, droga, alcohol, prostitución, delincuencia. La única de las 8 caletas del borde costero. Y es porque los pobladores están educados. Y yo pienso que con la educación de ellos vamos a llegar más lejos.
Sonia takes pride in the small steps that Chanavaya has taken to help itself.
Ya empezamos próximamente a instaurar las energías renovables por las calles, a iluminarle las calles, para demostrarle a la autoridad que con buena voluntad sí podemos hacer una caleta sostenible y sustentable.
One natural resource that's always been available here is fish.
Ellos en estos momentos, como ustedes están viendo, están pelando los peces de la noche. Estos esquelones se guardan, se raspan para hacer ceviche. Y con estas cabezas, ellos hacen una sopa que es un caldillo. Todo se utiliza.
But nowadays, even cleaning and cooking the fish is a problem. The area's scarce water is so polluted. One solution is to use the scales of the fish themselves to filter out pollutants in a process called biosorption.
Entonces hay que educar a las comunidades para que sepan utilizar las escamas para poder limpiar las aguas de contaminación de arsénico, que es una problemática muy común en todas las zonas rurales y también zonas urbanas de la zona norte de Chile.
But there's no guarantee that Chanavaya will continue to get even the little water it does receive. Along the coast, it has a competitor for supply. These industrial reservoirs will be left to evaporate and their copper residue exported. Sonia feels Chanavaya has been left high and dry.
Hoy en día no existe nada. Y esto, digamos, es debido no al calentamiento global, esto es debido a la mano del hombre. El hombre está utilizando las aguas en las minerías y así como va mermando la vida de las poblaciones, también de la naturaleza.
Sonia sees multinationals buying up the water with profits boosted by Chile's low tax rates, whilst Chanavaya is drained of social investment.
Y nosotros hoy en día no tenemos voto en decir no queremos esto. Esta mortandad no la queremos para nuestras futuras generaciones. Nosotros queremos un medio ambiente con agua, con flora, con fauna.
For Chanavaya, every drop is precious. Locally, it's pioneering a scheme to scoop water out of thin air. These nets catch condensation from coastal fog. The droplets are piped down to the town below. Sonia is always keen to demonstrate the system to others who may adopt it across the region.
Y estamos en enero instalando el primer sistema de riego a goteo en el borde costero para hacer más eficiente el uso del agua.
It's all very low-tech, and it's just a start. But for Sonia, even such a small-scale community project is important. It's a sign that she was right to come home and make a stand.
Yo amo vivir en Chanavaya. Esto es impagable, la tranquilidad, el mar ahí mismo. Entonces, debemos luchar para no perderlo, para poder tener nuestra generación futura aquí. Lo bueno de todo esto, que nuestros chicos, los jóvenes, son los que han ido creando la conciencia ecológica.
Chanavaya's struggle for survival continues. Not far away, the quest for water has quite a different meaning. Perched 2,600 meters above the coastal plain is one of the most important scientific research centers in the world. Here, at the European Southern Observatory, astronomers are searching distant galaxies. This is an internationally funded venture, a scientific oasis. Every night here is another working day.
Nuestras vidas están totalmente desplazadas aquí en el observatorio. O sea, tenemos que dormir las 7 y las 2 de la tarde. A las 2 nos levantamos, venimos a tomar desayuno y este es el primero de una larga serie de cafés. Hay que mantenerse despierto de alguna manera, especialmente al final del turno.
Fernando Salman needs to stay alert. He's working with the world's most advanced optical instrument. It's a complex system of mirrors which can see further into space than humanity ever has before. It's so powerful that it can distinguish distant images as small and as dim as the headlights of a car on the moon would be to the naked eye. Despite all that, it has a curiously unscientific name, the VLT, the Very Large Telescope. The VLT allows scientists here to study the molecular makeup of planets in other solar systems.
Hace mucho tiempo se descubrió que cada elemento emite luz de un color particular. Si tú tomas sal en tu cocina y la pones en la llama del gas, eso va a emitir una luz amarilla muy fuerte. Entonces cada elemento tiene una firma propia y tú estudias los colores del objeto, tú puedes determinar si están presentes esos elementos. Uno de estos elementos es agua.
For astronomers, the search for water on distant planets is the Holy Grail. Where there is water, there may be life, and perhaps an answer to the fundamental question, are we alone in the universe? The Atacama is the ideal place to search for evidence. Humidity levels here are so low, there's little danger of atmospheric moisture giving a false reading.
Es una paradoja que justamente la sequedad y la falta de agua en este lugar y la poca capacidad de sostener vida que hay en este lugar es lo que hace este lugar el ideal para descubrir agua y vida en otros planetas.
The Atacama is so dry that NASA road tests its Martian Explorer here. Parts of this desert are effectively sterile. Not even bacteria can survive in the soil. It's the closest thing to Mars on Earth. And if NASA's probe can search out life here, it's mission ready to find life on other planets. By exploring the limits of life on Earth, astrobiologists are hoping to learn more about how life may survive on other worlds. And there are some promising indicators.
Parece haber agua en todas partes, de hecho. Está presente hasta en la Luna, está presente en los cometas, en los asteroides, en las lunas de Júpiter, de Saturno. Incluso está presente alrededor de agujeros negros en galaxias muy lejanas. El agua está en todas partes.
But Fernando knows the presence of water is not enough. To sustain life, it must exist in a stable form.
Si no tuviésemos agua en estado líquido aquí en nuestro planeta, la vida no sería posible. No nos basta con el vapor.
While the ultimate question about life on other planets remains unanswered, this unique desert location is a daily reminder to the scientists here that our home in the universe is a very special one.
Planetas exactamente como la Tierra no se han encontrado. Es una de las labores que pienso que debemos dedicarle tiempo en difundir este conocimiento que nuestro planeta es único.
The Atacama, the driest desert. This place lays bare the most fundamental questions facing humanity. Questions about the world and our place in it. No one here can afford to take even the most basic necessities for granted. And yet it's a place where fortunes can be found and extracted. It reminds us that how we enrich our lives and what we pass on to our children, these are choices about the use of scarce resources. If what sustains life is worth pursuing to the ends of the universe, and if what denies life is worth exposing no matter what the cost, the Atacama reveals in the clearest possible light how the balance of nature rests in our hands. Deserts, the driest places on Earth, covering more than a fifth of all the world's landmass, as dangerous to life as the highest peak or the coldest glacier. But in these harsh and barren wastelands, nature endures. People have lived in the desert since the beginning of time. Resilient and resourceful, they have developed unique cultures and deep spiritual bonds with these arid lands. But the modern world of commerce and industry is encroaching on the desert, claiming its resources, changing the delicate balance of life. Now, more than ever, desert people must adapt to survive. This series tells their story of struggle and endeavor, of humanity's continuing relationship with the most challenging places on Earth. Empty, inhospitable, devoid of human life. If that's how deserts are supposed to be, this one breaks the mold. Straddling the border between India and Pakistan, it covers 250,000 square kilometers. It can bloom with colorful trees and grasses, and it nurtures its animal life in surprising ways. It was conquered by humanity centuries ago, despite the dearth of water here. But it's an ancient desert that's moving with the times. And that brings new pressures. Known as the land of death, it's full of life in astonishing diversity. Today, it's the most populated desert in the world, home to nearly 30 million people. This is the Thar, the teeming desert. Jaisalmer, a desert city that stood the test of time. For nearly 1,000 years, it has sat on the arid plains of western Rajasthan. But there's a reason why it's here. It was the Indian king Rawal Jasal who founded Jaisalmer in the year 1156. He was said to be a descendant of Lord Krishna, and legend has it that he chose to build here because of a miraculous sign sent by Krishna himself. Clearly, it was a wise choice. Jaisalmer sits on an ancient trading superhighway between east and west. As spices and silks and other luxuries passed through their hands, traders and merchants built ornate homes and temples. Over the centuries, the population here has risen as trade has prospered, and fallen again with droughts and wars. But Jaisalmer has never seen change on the scale that's happening right now. In the last decade, it's grown by more than a third. Its booming tourist industry is sucking people in search of work and new opportunities. More than 600,000 now call it home, and the growing population demands more from this ancient desert city. More space, more power, more water. Jaisalmer is crumbling under the pressure. That pressure is most evident in the very place that draws the tourists here, Jaisalmer Fort. Rising straight out of the desert, it dominates the landscape for miles around. Its sandstone walls give Jaisalmer its nickname, the Golden City. For centuries, this fort has protected the Maharajas and the people of Jaisalmer from raids and wars and the extremes of the desert climate. Thousands still make their homes inside the walls. That's why it's called the only living fort in India. But it's a living fort under deadly attack. Strangely, here in the desert, the culprit is water. During the last 15 years, the human demand for water inside the fort has multiplied 12 times over. Once the water is used, it drains away through the soft sandstone, causing the fort's foundations to sink into the hill beneath. The fort is crumbling in dangerous and unpredictable ways. 6 people were killed when one wall collapsed in 1998. Bindu Minchanda is one of those who's trying to save Jaisalmer from dissolving back into the desert.
This section, it's being pulled away from the main section of the palace, and if that collapses, it's going to create a lot of havoc because there are people living under this, they have their homes there. Also, it will bring down with it the main palace.
ये बढ़ गया। हाँ, इसको dismantle कर दोगे। हाँ।
Bindu has worked here for the last 15 years with a whole team of craftsmen, builders and conservationists. They're fighting to save the ancient glories of this crumbling monument, but they're battling against mistakes made in its recent history.
Originally, they had no water inside except the wells. In the 70s, water was got up to the fort. The government did that to make life more comfortable for the people of the fort.
The need for mains water was understandable, but unfortunately, proper drainage systems were not put in place at that crucial time.
Some kind of drainage does exist, but it's not adequate. In the 70s, tourism also started in a big way. And a lot of people converted their homes into guest houses or small hotels. So there was this double whammy. There was a lot of tourism and there was free water.
The technical problems are complex and massive. But this isn't just an exercise in building engineering. The efforts to shore up the fort have to go ahead right in the middle of a living community. 5,000 residents and 500,000 visitors every year.
It's not a dead monument, it's a living monument, and therefore to preserve it and to preserve it in such a way that people can continue living here is very important.
Much of the hard graft is done by a cooperative of local stonemasons. They've inherited the traditional skills of building in this desert environment. The very skills that are so evident in the fabric of the monument that they're laboring to save. The fort is an architectural marvel. Its lattice work brings in cool air to control the temperature inside. The modern conservationists are determined to be just as sympathetic to the environment. They use traditional materials, and one particular member of the team is accumulating a wealth of experience in working this way.
We produce our own lime because we only use lime for our work. We started producing this lime 15 years back, and this camel has been working for us for the last 15 years. He's our camel lime expert.
Bindu and the team are rescuing the past and safeguarding it for future generations. But their commitment to this huge project goes further than hard work and logistics. Jaisalmer has captured their hearts too.
I love the fact that it's made all of one stone. How hard people have worked to make this place, you know, in this desert, they've created this beauty with whatever was available to them. They didn't have greenery, they didn't have trees, they didn't have water, but they created this beautiful place for them. The intrinsic beauty has not been spoiled. The core of the fort, the soul of the fort exists, and I just love that.
Jaisalmer is not the only urban center in this desert that's growing and developing. Everywhere in the Thar, people are on the move, millions of them. And as with so many other deserts around the world, motorized transport is now the norm. Tractors and trucks, cars and bikes are pushing out the traditional ship of the desert, the camel. The old nomadic way of life, which depended on the camel, is becoming less and less viable economically. Right across the Thar, camel numbers are in steep decline. Some estimates suggest that in the last decade alone, the camel population has been reduced by half. The camel is a creature superbly well adapted to the desert. It's played a central part in shaping how people have survived and thrived here in the Thar. For centuries, it's been used not just as a means of transport, but also as a draft animal for its strength and stamina, and as a weapon in times of war. But the loss of the camel could have implications not just here, but much further afield. In modern times, scientists have begun to realize that the camel may hold a vital key in their search for answers to a whole range of human health problems. Dr. Nitin Patil of the National Research Center for Camels has a personal mission to reverse the fortunes of these ships of the desert. He's studied camels for 2 decades.
ऊँटनियों का दूध जो है वो की क्वालिटी में बहुत ही अच्छा देखा गया है, जिसमें कि मुख्यतः ये पाया गया है कि इसमें कम फैट, वसा की मात्रा बड़ी कम होती है। इसमें जो जिस तरह का फैट पाया जाता है वो भी पॉली अनसैचुरेटेड फैटी एसिड है, जिसमें कि लिनोलिक एसिड नाम का जो तत्व है वो बहुत प्रमाण में पाया जाता है।
Camel milk protein is good for babies who are lactose intolerant and cannot digest cow or buffalo's milk. Camel milk has benefits for adults too. Dr. Patil's team is helping to establish the scientific basis for it.
उसमें ये पाया गया है कि कैमल मिल्क में जो इंसुलिन नाम का तो तत्व है, इंसुलिन जैसे एक तत्व है, उसका उपयोग ज़रूर होता है कि जिससे कि इंसुलिन लेने की मात्रा हम कम कर सकते हैं पेशेंट्स में, और ये टाइप 1 डायबिटीज़ के लिए है।
And it's not just the camel's milk that could be a great boon for human health. Camel blood may offer a breakthrough in the treatment of cancer.
वो बहुत अच्छी है, जिसका कारण है कि उनके अंदर जो एंटीबॉडीज़ है वो नैनो एंटीबॉडीज़ है। कैमल की एंटीबॉडीज़ को लेते हुए कुछ कैंसर के डायग्नोस्टिक एजेंट्स हम तैयार कर सकते हैं, इससे कुछ वैक्सीन्स हम तैयार कर सकते हैं।
What's truly unique about Dr. Patil's center is the way in which it collaborates with a caste of traditional camel herders called the Raika. Raikas are guardians of a variety of indigenous breeds of camel, which they've bred specifically for the harsh climate of the Great Indian Desert. No one knows the Thar camel like the Raika.
Pareedi, Bikaneri pareedi, Bikaneri digdi, Bikaneri shurungdi, Bikaneri bugli. यानी माँ दूरा दूर नानी दूर दूरा पहचान दे, 3 पीढ़ी ताईं पहचान सकते हैं। गया फलाने की बेटी है, फलाने दोस्ती है, फलाने आप बच्चे नमाज लेने जैसे ही मैं जानते दे मेवाड़ी डुगली।
The knowledge exchange goes both ways. The scientists test the Raika's traditional cures for camel diseases, and they feed back to them what the laboratory analysis is showing about the most effective treatments.
परंपरागत जो दवाई की बात है या परंपरागत ज्ञान की जो बात है ऊँट पालन के महत्व में, वो रायका लोगों के पास बहुत ज़्यादा है। तो हमने एक प्रोजेक्ट में इसका काम चालू कर दिया है कि जहाँ परंपरागत जो प्रणाली है दवाई की, उसको हम टेस्ट करते हुए हम ये प्रमाणित करेंगे कि ये जो प्रचलित
परंपरागत प्रणाली थी वो सच में सही है या नहीं है.
And it's certainly not just an academic exercise. Dr. Patil's team goes out into the villages where the camel herders live. Out here, they hold surgeries to share their insights into camel welfare. The camel herders give the scientists a hands-on insight into the realities of keeping their livestock healthy.
परिवार का हिस्सा ही है महत्वपूर्ण चीज़ है सर. पहला हिस्सा परिवार का ये दूध का ही इसमें जड़ वाटर में लाने के लिए भी काम आता है ये हमारे पानी पिलाने के लिए.
The villagers depend on the camel for their daily necessities and their long-term economic well-being. So although their own traditional cures and treatments can be effective enough for routine ailments, there are times when they're very glad to be able to call in the expertise of the centre's medics and scientists.
सबसे पास हमारे तो यहाँ पर नहीं बीकानेर जाना होता सर. मैडम वैसे तो टेलीफोन कर देते जैसे आ सकते हैं सरकार की तरफ और हमारे दवाई जो देते फ्री देते उससे कोई पे रकम नहीं लेते. ये फ़ायदा हो सकता है लेकिन हम गरीब गांव के हैं आदमी इसलिए वहाँ पहुँचने में कठिन है. इसलिए वहाँ से आएंगे टेलीफोन कर दें वैसे आ जाएगा.
The camel has always been the mainstay of rural life. Historically, the ship of the desert has been one of the glories of the Thar. Dr. Patil is determined that it should have a future here too.
तो उसके डेवलपमेंट के लिए जब मैं काम करूँगा तो मुझे बहुत खुशी होगी और कैमल भी बचेगा और उन लोगों का भी बचाव होगा कि जो ऊँट पालन के साथ जुड़े हुए हैं. साथ ही साथ ऐसे लोगों का भी उद्धार होगा कि जहाँ पे कैमल के प्रोडक्ट्स चाहे वो बाल से बने हों, चाहे वो उसकी खाल से बने हों या चाहे उससे दूध से बने हों, उन लोगों की भी उपजीविका बहुत अच्छी तरह से टिक पाएगी.
Life in the great Indian desert is tough. In some ways, it's a miracle that anyone can make a home in the Thar. The landscape is unforgiving. Creeping sands, shifting dunes, hot winds, miserable droughts. The Thar has long been celebrated in history as Marustali, a mysterious, merciless and hostile land. But the name Marustali comes from the word Maho, the local term for the alluvium-rich depressions between the sandy ridges. It's the Maho which act as drainage basins, collecting the sudden seasonal downpours. They make it possible for desert grasses to grow, animals to graze, and people to live here in small settlements. Pitarai, a day's journey by camel from Jaisalmer. Over the centuries, people have managed to survive here, herding goats and devising countless ingenious ways of coping with the harsh environment. Now their ingenuity is being taxed all over again by the challenges of the 21st century. Puri is one villager who's seen how much life has changed for her children and grandchildren. There's one thing the modern world hasn't changed. Women are still the mainstay of village life. Whilst the men are off moving their animals around the desert in search of food, it's the women who stay at home and keep the village fed and watered. Their day begins and ends with water. They have to fetch and carry, and with twice daily practice, Puri's granddaughters make light work of a heavy load as they walk home with their aunt Babri.
मोटी चमची आए पानी वाली आए हैंगा पहला होसना पड़े और से धान के कुटल वारू आए होसना पड़े भेड़ बकरी का वास्ते जमान आवाज ना सब चीज हुए.
The village is one extended family living in 6 houses. They are small and dark inside, but they keep out heat in the summer and retain warmth in the cold winter nights. The women work together for the good of all. One of the first tasks each morning is to brew up chai, the masala tea with spices and pepper that's a speciality of the region. Not all of the animals are away with the men. It's the women who have to feed those who remain. Even today, this way of life is pretty much self-sufficient. And of course, it's the goats which provide milk for the villagers. Cooking is the next task. These days, Rajasthani cuisine, with its spicy delicacies, is fashionable in restaurants the world over. But it's based on simple principles and practices that have been passed down to these women by their mothers. It's all about nourishing a family in desert conditions. They depend on food that doesn't perish easily. You can store it for days, even in extremes of heat. There are practical reasons as well as religious ones to be vegetarian here. One of the staples is buttermilk, which the women are preparing today. Cooking with buttermilk and ghee saves on the use of precious water. The same goes for the washing up. When the cooking is done, the women clean the dishes with sand. But these are women who do much more than household chores and childcare. They're responsible for maintaining the fabric of the whole village. And they do jobs which many societies expect the men to undertake. Today, the women are off to cut firewood. It's not just used for cooking. Nighttime temperatures here can fall well below zero, and keeping the family warm is a priority. Once they're away from the village and out of the company of men, the women relax and become much less formal. They're happy enough to remove the veils they wear at home. They share a joke about how much work they do and how much easier it might be to be a man.
गायों गटियां घुमानी सब्जी बनानी मेहनत को करनी से
आदमी नहीं करता है
आदमी नहीं करे लोग करनी पड़े.
It amuses the women to imagine what would result if they ever took a holiday and left the men to it.
सफाई से नहीं करेगा
सफाई नहीं हुए हो
सफाई से नहीं करेगा सफाई नहीं होया करे
रोटी खानी है खानो है तो खाना है तो रोटी ठो वो ठोनो इतने रख दे बर्तन भी रख दे
सफाई से नहीं होता है सफाई कहीं होए नहीं गाय दूधी दूध जो कौन बकरी दूध बनाए साफ बनावे तो ये
मनी ले गयो तावरा अरे कार मनी ले गयो तावरा दे गयो
These women are builders too. In one of the village houses, the floor has been damaged and needs to be replaced. Again, the women have to depend on the resources around them. The first stage is to dig out the clay they need. The clay is trampled into animal dung to make a door. It's a traditional method, but it seems thoroughly modern to be recycling waste in this eco-friendly way. And the children can get involved too. Now all that's left to do is to lay the new floor. The hands that carry the water, milk the goats, cook the food, chop the firewood, and comfort the children are also strong and skilled enough to get this job done. Traditions here are robust, but the village isn't immune from the pressures which are revolutionizing rural life all over the globe. Young men from the village routinely leave to go to work in the city. Economic opportunities there are so much greater, and the lifestyle can seem more exciting. Today, Puri's grandson, Ramesh, is coming home to visit from his job as a chef in the city. Family ties are strong, but the pull of the modern world is hard to resist.
राम राम। हाँ बिल्कुल, यहाँ तो काम है नहीं, अब शहरों में जा रहे हैं लगभग। यहाँ अब कौन है, कोई नहीं है, युवा में कोई रहता नहीं है। लगभग सब हमारे भाई भाई है, सब वहीं काम करते हैं जैसलमेर में। ज़्यादा अच्छा पैसा मिलता नहीं है, काम भी इतनी मजदूरी नहीं है, और काम है जो हार्ड है, हार्ड कोई करना नहीं चाहता, इसलिए जैसलमेर चले जाते हैं।
Ketaram, Ramesh's father, is content to let him find his own way.
बढ़िया है, कोई भी धंधो करे बढ़िया ही रहा, धंधो अच्छा है, करता हुआ बहुत बढ़िया। कोई भी धंधो करना चाहिए आदमी को, आपके पैरों पे खड़ा हो जाओ बहुत बढ़िया है।
But it's not just a matter of personal choice. There are economic realities to be faced.
मुसलमान रहता है हमारे गांव में, एक के 10-10, 15-15 बच्चा, 10-10 एकड़ आती थी, उसमें 2 भाई थे, 5-5 आई है, 2 भाई 3-3 बच्चे हैं, तो 2-2 एकड़ आएगी उसकी, कम तो होगी।
Many are trapped in this cycle of rural poverty.
ताकि ऐसा कई आदमी है, उसके कुछ नहीं है, लड़का पढ़ाते ही नहीं है, आज दिन तक उसको माल मवेशी में काम, उसके पास 1000-1200 भेड़ बकरी है, और छोटा बच्चा होता है, उसको ये छोटा बच्चा है, भेड़ बकरियाँ इसके पीछे घुमाते हैं, बड़ा होता है, भेड़ों के लारे लगा देते हैं।
Life all around the villages is changing in so many ways. Wind farms are sprouting up on what was once pasture. In some parts of the Thar, the land around them is being fenced off. Sprinkler systems irrigate crops on fields once grazed by animals. But despite everything, these women are holding their families together and passing on their way of life to a new generation. Age-old customs and fresh challenges. Another day in the Thar has come to an end. But across the desert in Bikaner, the night is just beginning. At the Lalgar Palace, there's a wedding party. India's newly rich middle class is out to splash the cash. This spectacular location is home to the Maharajas, who established the first settlement in this part of the desert more than 500 years ago. Nowadays, the palace is a luxury resort, and one that's still run by royalty. Princess Rajashiri Kumari is the daughter of the Maharajas of Bikaner.
Essentially, the lives of my ancestors is inextricably linked with the deserts of the Thar. We are children of the Thar Desert, and the early ancestors must have faced incredible hardships because it was always a question of survival.
But survive they did, and better times were to come. This palace is testament to the wealth the Maharajas were able to accumulate over the centuries, even from a barren desert.
The ancestors used to send the revenue collectors off on camelback with this object, and they went from village to village collecting the taxes, and then when all was done, attached this incredibly heavy lock, which I can barely lift, to the lock here and securely bring back the revenue for the coffers. But you know, looking at the weight of all of this, it must have been quite an exercise for the poor camel to have to carry this load, but they're hardy beasts and seem to have survived.
Over the centuries, the Maharaja's efforts to tame the Thar, to make it truly fertile, came up against one obvious but seemingly insuperable object: the lack of water. One particularly severe drought at the beginning of the 20th century brought famine and death. That harrowing experience left an unforgettable impression on the young Maharaja of Bikaner, Gangar Singh. He resolved that never again, if human enterprise and skill could prevent it, should his people have to face starvation. His bold plan? To build a canal across the desert.
My great-grandfather was a firm believer that the land was fertile, all it lacked was the water. And so he set about engineering the scheme of bringing a canal from the Satluj River into Bikaner.
In 1927, despite opposition from neighboring states, but to great public acclaim, 143 kilometers of canal were opened by the British Viceroy of India. The Maharaja's scheme to irrigate the Thar was a reality. His determination and vision still inspire his great-granddaughter.
The area was all desert in those days, and it was a very harsh desert. Incredible heats, sandstorms that turned the sky black in the day. There was no electricity, no water, no natural lakes or rivers.
The princess was a spirited young woman, and she recognizes how fortunate she was to inherit Ganga Singh's legacy and to grow up in the opulent surroundings of the Lalgar Palace.
It was an amazing childhood because the palace was a private residence, all of it, when we were children. We had the whole palace, all the grounds and everything to play around with and enjoy ourselves with our friends, and it was a very golden childhood.
Famous visitors to the palace included the British King George V. And it was the British who helped the family with the upkeep of the palace by payments from the privy purse, a system that continued for some decades after India became independent. But when Indira Gandhi abolished these privileges in 1971, 2 wings of the palace had to be converted into hotels to pay the bills. The princess has no regrets about that. After all, change has often benefited Bikaner. Her great-grandfather's canal and Mrs. Gandhi's Green Revolution have secured water and food for her people. But if the desert around Bikaner has been tamed, perhaps something of its romance has been lost.
What I am sad to see is that the desert as we knew it is disappearing. When we were kids, we had absolutely virgin sand dunes, you know, just around here, and now because of the forestation and the plantation and water and all the rest of it, the actual virgin desert is becoming less and less accessible.
A canal isn't the only desert wonder built by the princess's great-grandfather. Maharaja Ganga Singh is also responsible for this place. The Kardani Mata Temple. Building this temple was an act of devotion. It was also a shrewd political move. Kings who want to be powerful in India must be protected by goddesses, and Ganga Singh chose to honor one of the most charismatic of all. Karni Mata was a mystic matriarch from the 14th century. She is said to be an incarnation of Durga, the goddess of power and victory. The temple Ganga Singh built for Karni Mata is famous for one thing: rats. By now, 20,000 of them live here. For the faithful, they're holy animals, known as kabas. The story goes that a young relative of Karni Mata died. Karni Mata tried to bring him straight back to life, but the god of death forbade her. So rather than abandon the child to Yamlok, the abode of the dead, Karni Mata used her powers to reincarnate him as a rat. And from then on, she swore all of her tribe who died would follow the same path. For Hindus, death completes one leg of our journey towards oneness with the universe and marks the start of a new one. This belief in the cycle of reincarnation explains why the pilgrims venerate these rats. They're seen as members of Karni Mata's own family, waiting to be reborn again as humans.
हिंदू शास्त्रों के अनुसार जब कोई इंसान मरता है तो उसे ऊपर यमलोक जाना पड़ता है, अपने किए गए कर्मों का उसे लेखा जोखा देना पड़ता है। परंतु यहाँ पर ये सारी चीज़ें नहीं होती। यहाँ पर माता करनी की कृपा से सब लोगों को यहीं रखा जाता है और उनका जीवन चक्र यहीं से चलता है। इसलिए ये लोग एक तरीके से हम लोग कह सकते हैं पूर्वज हैं।
20,000 rats live here. Just 4 or 5 are said to be white. They are manifestations, according to the faithful, of Karni Mata and her 4 sons. Spotting them is a special blessing. So the pilgrims try to call them out by offering prasad, a sweet holy food. The rumor that a white rat has been seen is enough to cause a bit of a stir. All of the rats here are treated with respect. Anyone who tramples on one by accident is obliged to make up for it by paying for a gold statue of a rat instead. Devotion to rodents known to carry plague may seem odd to outsiders, but in the 100 years since Ganga Singh built this temple, it's never been known for these rats to pass on sickness to their visitors. In the teeming desert, that is a wonder in itself. Survival in the desert is tough for all life, human and animal. People here have always known that. It's an understanding that nurtured the ancient Indian philosophy of Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam, that the whole world is one single family. It's an all-embracing principle that helped shape the thinking of Mahatma Gandhi. In some ways, it's as old as the desert, and yet it seems thoroughly up to speed with our globalized, interconnected world, and with today's concerns for the environment. In the village of Kichin, this holistic attitude has had an amazing impact for one species in particular, and it's produced a world-class natural history phenomenon. The story begins with these stone houses, the old homes of Kichin's merchant class, many of whom were Jains. Jains pay particular respect to all forms of life and are devoted to good works. In the 1970s, one Jain family here began to feed wild birds in their own backyard. A small number of demoiselle cranes were amongst them. From year to year, more feed was put out and more cranes came. By now, many of Kichin's Jains had left to trade in the city, but they sent back money to buy more grain. and asked locals like Gangaram Megwal to make sure that the birds were fed. The growing trickle of cranes turned into a flood.
सोचो ये लिए कि धर्म रे लिए सब काम कर रहे हो और धर्म रे लिए सब अच्छो है कोई मतलब एड़ी मेड़ी बीमारी को नहीं आवे शरीर में शरीर अच्छो रहे धर्म होए जने अच्छो ही रहे नी जने कहीं रहे
The demoiselle crane is a migrant bird. It arrives from as far away as Mongolia and China. It's noted in poetry and song as a symbol for people who ventured on long, hazardous journeys. It comes to spend the winter here, and by December it settles into an extraordinary daily pattern. Shortly after dawn, the cranes begin to gather on the dunes west of the village. Then they slowly advance down the hill, but on foot, not on the wing. Somehow these cranes have learned that if you're going to town, the way to do it is to walk. One bird leads the way. Groups further back may take flight and circle the feeding ground, checking for predators. If all is well, the lead bird hops over the fence. Soon hundreds, thousands follow, and Gangaram's banquet begins. Well over 10,000 cranes now come to take advantage of Kichen's generosity. Demoiselle crane numbers here far outstrip those recorded in its other wintering grounds in Rajasthan. Kichen is officially recognized for its support of this beautiful species. What happens here in the middle of the great Indian desert is now held up all over the world as a thrilling example of the benefits of conservation. Millions live in the Thar, but the desert separates them. Between each human community lies emptiness, harsh terrain, and big distances. But once a year, one special event draws together many of the people who live in the great Indian desert. The Nagaur Cattle Fair. 70,000 cattle and 25,000 camels are brought here for sale every year. Sheep and Mawari horses are also traded here. And 1,000 side stalls offer everything a fair-goer might need. Ornaments and jewellery, brassware and blankets, textiles and leather goods, all at bargain prices. Dawn. The great fair has already been underway for a week. For some, fortunes have been made. For others, a year's work in breeding and raising livestock has led only to disappointment. Today is the final chance to make good. Hari Ram is one of the farmers still looking to strike a deal.
ये सबसे बड़ा पशु मेला है हमारे लिए। इसमें पशु लाते हैं और उम्मीद से आते हैं कि पशु बिक जाएगा। हाँ, ऐसे हमारे के यहाँ पशु मेला में दोस्त बनते हैं, रिश्तेदार आते हैं, दोस्त भी आते हैं। वो दूर के होते हैं तो वो मेले में ही मिलते हैं। हाँ, मेरा गांव यहाँ से 30 किलोमीटर दूर है, वहाँ से आया, पैदल लेके आए हैं मेले।
Washing his animals is essential to show them off to best effect. But it's not a routine that Hari undertakes just at the fair. Even at home, these prize beasts must be kept clean of the dust of the desert.
अच्छे बैल हैं, अच्छी नस्ल है, नस्ल अच्छे नागौरी बैल हैं, अच्छी नस्ल के पैसे ज़्यादा ही होते हैं। इनको हल चलाया, गाड़ी चलाया, रेस में लगाया, रेस के लिए आते हैं।
Racing bullocks fetch premium prices. Normally, cattle sell here for around 10,000 rupees. But bullock racing is a big sport and big business. Champions win substantial prize money. So for his racers, Hari is looking for 100,000 rupees, 10 times the normal price. Hari has found one potential buyer who's looking for a bullock to race in tandem with one he's already trained. But are the two bullocks evenly matched? The test drive is over and the bargaining begins. Sadly for Hari, the team isn't perfectly balanced and the asking price is too high. Another deal goes begging. Farmers come from all over India to trade here. Nagar can be a buyer's market. For those with money to spend, there's no shortage of choice. Jangir Singh has travelled all the way from the Punjab, and he's determined it's not going to be a wasted journey. Fortunately, he's an old hand. He knows how to make money here.
ਇਹ ਵਪਾਰ ਵੀ ਕਰ ਲਈਦਾ, ਸ਼ੌਕ ਪੂਰਾ ਕਰ ਲਈਦਾ, ਨਾਲੇ ਸ਼ੌਕ ਪੂਰਾ ਕਰ ਲਈਦਾ, ਪੈਸੇ ਪੂਰੇ ਕਰ ਲਈਦੇ। ਇੱਥੋਂ 3000 ਤੱਕ ਲੈ ਜਾਈਏ, ਉੱਥੇ 10000 ਦਾ ਵੇਚ ਦਿੱਤਾ ਹੈ। ਉੱਥੇ 10000 ਦਾ ਵਿਕ ਜਾਂਦਾ ਸਾਲ ਭਰ, ਫਿਰ ਇੱਧਰ ਹੀ ਆ ਜਾਂਦਾ, ਹੋਰ ਖਰੀਦ ਲੈਂਦਾ ਵਪਾਰੀ।
And he's sure of a warm welcome when he gets home.
ट्रक ते भाग के ना ले जाना ते जाके आराम से तार लेने, काढ़ा काढ़ा घा घू देवांगे, इन्होंने जाके झाड़ांगे, फिर इन्हें सुक्का थां रखांगे ठा ते बच्चे जेह्ड़े जितने बच्चे है वो प्यार करनगे, साडे डैडी आ गए, साडे बछड़े आ गए, सोहना बच्चा है, अच्छा बच्चा लेके आया है।
The afternoon is wearing on. Hari Ram has failed to sell his prize racers. But with so many traders at the fair, he's still hopeful that the word has got around and that a buyer may turn up. Otherwise, keeping them in the desert for another year will be a real problem for him.
इनके लिए हमारे पास पानी की कमी है, हरा चारा नहीं है, सूखा चारा है, वो भी नहीं मिलता है। यहाँ तक ही हम चरा सकते हैं, आगे नहीं चरा सकते हैं, इसलिए बेचते हैं।
The long day is closing. The buying and selling is done. For another year, the fair is over. It's showtime. Desert dances and Rajasthani folk songs delight the traders and their families. The dancers belong to a caste of desert nomads, the Kalbelia. Their traditional occupation, catching snakes and trading venom. Some say their dance movements resemble those of serpents. It's meant as a compliment. Certainly, it's one of the most sensuous dance traditions of Rajasthan, and one that requires extreme athleticism. The fair is coming to an end in joyful and vivid celebration. This is life in the teeming desert. The Thar is a desert of surprise and incongruity. Canals across sand dunes, wild birds drawn to human kindness, rats devoutly honored in temples, as its cities expand, the human pressure on the great Indian desert takes its toll. Its ancient treasures crumble. Its villages lose their young, and its beasts of burden struggle against a modern world. But even in its harshest corners, the pulse of life here still beats strong. And the spirit of the teeming desert survives and thrives. The Thar remains a place of wonder. Deserts, the driest places on Earth, covering more than a fifth of all the world's landmass, as dangerous to life as the highest peak or the coldest glacier. But in these harsh and barren wastelands, nature endures. People have lived in the desert since the beginning of time. Resilient and resourceful, they have developed unique cultures and deep spiritual bonds with these arid lands. But the modern world of commerce and industry is encroaching on the desert, claiming its resources, changing the delicate balance of life. Now, more than ever, desert people must adapt to survive. This series tells their story of struggle and endeavor, of humanity's continuing relationship with the most challenging places on Earth. One of the most barren and breathtaking landscapes on Earth. Covering more than 1.5 million square kilometers, the Gobi is the largest desert in Asia. Vast tracts of which have been barely touched by man. In the summer, temperatures can reach a scorching 40 degrees Celsius. In winter, they fall to 40 below. Surviving here means keeping one step ahead of nature. It also means learning to live and love a landscape that looks to be the most forbidding on Earth. Nowhere else do animals and humans have to depend on each other so completely to survive. But there's change on the horizon. A new Mongolia is emerging. With one eye on untold riches, it's becoming a place of those who stand to gain and those who stand to lose. This is the Gobi, as it may never be seen again. From a distance, the Gobi seems to be one of the most inhospitable places on Earth. But if you look behind the dunes and into the valleys, the Gobi is home to nomadic farmers who, like their forefathers, have farmed the desert for nearly 10,000 years. Nomadic farming is the only life Aiditsaran Adilbish and his family have ever known. They know that the key to surviving in the desert is to keep working and keep moving, taking their animals with them. Wherever they are, every day starts the same way. Once Aiditsaran's wife Gamma has milked the herd, she prepares a traditional breakfast of seasoned camel milk. The family also keeps goats and sheep for wool and meat. In herders' terms, these animals are just about the same as a pocket full of cash. Just as nomadic families have developed a unique way of life, they've also developed special ways of communing with their creatures. Only a few hours ago, this ewe gave birth to 2 newborn lambs. Aiditsaran's family believe this ancient form of singing will stimulate spiritual and physical healing and encourage the lambs to suckle. It's an extraordinary relationship and shows just how much each one depends upon the other. But the family's dependence is heaviest on the most powerful animal they keep. The camel is the only means the farmers have to move their families and homes across the desert. No matter how harsh the weather, the camel always gets them to where they need to be. Keeping the herd healthy is key to the survival of Aiditsaran and his family. Sometimes they must leave the animals for days in the search for water. And while the camel looks to be docile, it can also be stubborn. Aiditsaran uses a traditional tool to rein it in. And today, the youngest in the herd must undergo a painful rite of passage. This ordeal might well have propagated the myth that the camel too can shed a tear. Aiditsaran knows the animal's suffering is a necessary evil. Without the nosepin, he would struggle to lead the herd to the very water source that keeps them alive. Today, Aiditsaran is taking his camels to a waterhole he last visited 8 months ago. The camel has an inbuilt early warning system for when it's thirsty. The first sign of dehydration is when its humps become floppy. Although these animals are legendary for being able to withstand desert conditions, they must drink fresh water regularly. And in winter, they depend on Aiditsaran to find it. What seems like an ordinary moment is really very precious. Iditran has made sure that his beloved camels will survive, at least for the next 10 days. It means peace of mind for the whole family. Tonight, in their tented home called a ger, they can relax and watch the news in the company of a rather unusual audience. But there's one family member who's absent. Over 1,400 kilometers away, Iditran's brother Biamba is also relaxing in his ger, set in a very different landscape.
Би одоо гэртээ өдрийн ээлжнийхээ ондоо нөгөө ээлжнийхээ залуутай хоёулахна амьдардаг.
Biamba is one of an increasing number of young Mongolian men who've chosen to turn their back on herding and embrace the life of a miner. Mongolia is being rocked by the biggest resource boom ever seen. And its epicenter is here, 80 kilometers north of the Chinese border at Oyu Toltoi, where mining giant Rio Tinto is building what's predicted to become the third largest gold and copper mine in the world. And the Mongolian government has negotiated itself a 34% stake in the project. It believes that this is Mongolia's best chance at lifting itself out of poverty. Vice President of the mine, Sanj Samanda, shares this vision.
Манай аав бол малчин хүн байсан. Гэхдээ намайг багад Улаанбаатар хотод шилжиж ирсэн. Тэгээ би сургуулиа төгсөөд геофизикийн мэргэжилтэй болсон. Тэгээ 15 жилийн өмнөөс энэ оюу толгойтой холбогдож ажиллаж байгаа.
Every day, Sanj gets up close and personal with meter after meter of core rock samples. And this is what he's looking for. Deposits of gold or copper embedded in the rock. Selective drilling for these samples takes the guesswork out of the search for metal ore. This room is a snapshot of how and where the metal ore is distributed within the rock. By piecing together the data, Sanj constructs a vertical slice of the Earth's layers, showing where the richest seams lie. But to get at it, they must dig deep. And this is where Biamba steps in. He is one of some 10,000 local miners who are working underground to get at these deposits. It's a dangerous and dirty job, but Biamba is embracing the challenge.
Аавгаа өнгөрснөөс хойш тэгээ энэ дээр ажиллахаар болсон. Би одоо энд ирснээр тэгээд Монгол улс төдийгүй өөрийнхөө аймаг орон нутагт том хувь нэмэр оруулж байгаа гэж боддог. Би тэрүүгээрэж бахархдаг.
Today, Biamba is part of a team cutting a tunnel that will give access to the ore deposits underground.
When we go down today, we're going to start off with 2 pipes. You must remember, when doing pipes or any work that might have a danger of things falling, danger plate to the bottom. Guys in the bottom adhere to the rules towards the danger plate.
The main shaft extends more than 1.3 kilometers into the earth.
Шафтад байгуулснаар одоо бид нар ч одоо бол зүгээр сурчгоо уурах ажид. Тэгээд ер нь явандаа тэгэл энд одоо олон ам, хэдэн ам босох байх. Тэрийг ер нь явандаа ер нь тийшээгээл Тэр босон амыг л ер нь босгох улсууд юм шиг байна.
Once the shaft is made safe, the rock will be blasted to expose the ore and mineral-rich debris that's transported to the surface. It's a massive technical achievement. And above ground, the construction challenge gets even bigger. When ferocious dust storms and 140 kilometers per hour winds sweep across the desert, the mine's profitability hangs in the balance.
Говь нутагт том үйлдвэр барихад их хэцүү. Салхитай үед болохоор энэ том краанууд болохоор ингээ ачаан савлаад ингээд байдаг. Тэгэхээр зэрэг хүчтэй салхитай үед бид нар ажиллаа зогсоох хэрэгтэй. Газар дээш, газар доорч. Тэгэхээр зэрэг бид нар ингээд үнэтэй цагаа алдаал байна гэсэн үг.
For good karma, the mine was opened on an auspicious day in the Buddhist calendar. But making money in the desert calls for more than good luck. Only by mammoth industrial effort can the Gobi be transformed from fruitless terrain to a land of wealth and opportunity. If this mine is profitable, it will more than double Mongolia's GDP in the coming decade.
Тийм учраас бид нар зөвхөн одоо мөнгө төгрөгтэй болохоос гадна мэрэгжилтэд бэлдэж авах дараагийн ордуудыг ашиглахад бэлтгэл болох ёстой.
All this change means Biamba is living a vastly altered lifestyle. It's the first time he's ever had so much purchasing power. With a salary of $2,000 a month, he earns 13 times more than his nomadic brother. He no longer lives on a diet of goat meat. And his social life revolves around his work colleagues rather than his family. It's a massive cultural shift. To soften the blow, the company houses its workers in traditional tented accommodation. But life inside hardly feels like home.
Ээлж солигдоод ирэхээр энэ гэр дандаа манай ажлын улсууд амьдардаг. 28 хоног ажиллаад 14 хоног амардаг. 14 хоног амрахтаа ер нь гэртээ байж ахыдаа нэг очиж нэг 4-5 хоног гадаа тэнгэр муухай энтрээл ер нь хүний сэтгэлж хувирдаг шүү дээ. Тэрэн шиг тэнгэр эвгүй үед гэрээ санана.
What's happening here in the Gobi is indicative of what's happening all over Mongolia. It's predicted that by 2020, Mongolia's GDP will be 5 times the amount it is today. Increasingly, people are turning away from traditional desert life. As the young embrace their newfound opportunities, the change looks to be irrevocable. This generation may never know what it is to live face to face with the elements. Nowhere is this social transformation brought about by mining more evident than in the capital, Ulaanbaatar. This is the modern face of Mongolia, where more than 1 million people are city dwellers. Most who live here are enjoying a level of prosperity that just a few years ago would have been unimaginable. But outside the city, life remains a daily battle with the elements. Most people here have nothing to do with big business. though many harbour their own dreams of prospecting the desert's minerals, albeit on a very small scale. In the snowy mountains, 6 hours' drive south of Ulaanbaatar, are 3 family men hoping to strike it rich. Most days, Otgon Munk and his colleagues travel far from home to explore the disused gold mines that dot the landscape. Otgon is just one of tens of thousands of small-time miners who illegally prospect the Gobi. And he has a very personal reason for wanting to unearth something more valuable than piles of grit. Every day it's the same routine. Setting up their poultry equipment for hours of sifting dirt in the hope of finding something that sparkles. The day's work goes from dawn to dusk. Even in heavy snow, all the holes are dug by hand. While one man shovels the dirt, the others use metal detectors in a desperate search to pinpoint any grains of gold. If they fail to find anything, there's one last-ditch rummage by hand before they admit defeat and strike the next plot of earth. Not only is this mining illegal, it's incredibly dangerous. The men must dig as fast as they can before they are discovered by authorities. But they have neither the time nor the energy to reinforce their tunnels. Already they've dug more than 4 meters down into the soft desert rock. If the tunnel walls collapse, Otgon and his men could suffocate to death in a matter of minutes. With the value of gold almost at an all-time high, safety is something these men are willing to sacrifice. A nugget this size could fetch $280 on the black market. But today, all Otgon and his team managed to find is a tiny speck of gold. Otgon lives in hope that one day his luck will change. Meanwhile, in this desolate landscape, there's only one other means he has to take care of his family, and that's to continue his life as a nomadic herder. In this desert, finding grassland for his herd is often a struggle, but lately it's been getting more and more difficult. Otgon's plan to make enough money to send his daughter offshore for medical treatment is looking increasingly unlikely. These days he has to travel much further in search of pasture, as it seems like the elements are conspiring against him. Just as it is everywhere else on Earth, Mongolia is getting hotter. But nature here is experiencing more dramatic climate change than the rest of the world. In some places, temperatures have risen more than 2 degrees Celsius in just 65 years. frozen springs are melting. Rivers and lakes are drying up. More than 2/3 of pasture land is now no longer suitable for grazing. The desert is advancing. In every corner of the Gobi, humans, plants, and animals are facing the dire consequences of climate change. One creature more than any other is clinging to existence. The elusive snow leopard. A solitary, graceful hunter, skilled at traversing rugged, steep terrain. The snow leopard hides out in the icy mountains of Central Asia and the Himalayas. Like the nomadic herders, they are the last of their kind. Here in the South Gobi, there are fewer than 1,000 snow leopards left in the wild. Yet incredibly, they are still being voraciously hunted by their one and only predator. Man. And this is what's been happening to this magnificent cat. In the cities of Mongolia, salubrious restaurants continue to use snow leopard fur as decoration. There are at least 100 pelts lining these walls. And the snow leopard is so precious that nothing goes to waste. Once the pelts have been harvested, their skeletons are sold for traditional Chinese medicine and can be worth $200 each. Today, snow leopard numbers are in steep decline. But recognizing that the snow leopard is as intrinsic to Mongolia as the snowy mountains themselves, one man is on a mission to save them. As a biologist working with the Snow Leopard Trust, Sunbe Tumasuk is one of the few people on the planet who's had a close encounter with the big cat. On a scientific field trip, his team trapped the creature for tagging. Sunbe got close enough to touch it before releasing it into the wild.
Одоо хурдан оч харах юмсан л гэсэн тийм бодолтой ирсэн. Үнэхээр л гайхамшигтай сайхан амтан байсан. Сонолцсон тэр урт бие, тэр сүүл, тэр өөрийнх нь өнгө төрх гэдэг. Тэгэд бол маш тийм өндөр сэтгэлтэй одоо ингээл цаохоор ирээс гэдэг амтныг харчаад бол үнэхээр л өндөр сэтгэл төрж байсан л да.
Sunbe spends most of his time traveling vast distances talking to herders who share the same inhospitable terrain as the prowling snow leopards. Today, Sunbe's meeting goat herder Oyun Gevesh, who lives with her extended family in the remote village of Toshtbag on the southwest tip of Mongolia. The family rely entirely on their animals for their survival. But due to the increasingly dry conditions, the herd is now roaming further to find food, deep into snow leopard territory. The family is increasingly worried about the threat of a snow leopard attack. Suddenly, there's a sound outside that almost certainly spells trouble. The cry of a goat in distress. All week, there have been rumors of a big cat prowling the area, and even grandmother scans the horizon for some clues as to what has caused the commotion. Sunbe speeds off in the direction of the noise. while Oyun takes a shortcut over a small ridge to the west. Within minutes, she finds a clue that stops her dead in her tracks. The unmistakable evidence of an attack. One of Oyun's precious goats has bled to death from a throat wound. Nobody is sure whether this is the work of a snow leopard or a hungry pack of wolves. The proof is at their feet. The fact that the carcass has been left to rot rather than eaten confirms that this time the wolf is the culprit. While other herders might have wrongly blamed the leopard, Chimge knows the difference.
Ирүүс бол чон шиг тэгж 20-30-аар нь хязгаартай юм биш шүү дээ одоо. Бараг одоо өөрийнхөө хэрэгцээгээр тэг аваа явж байдаг учраас би бол ирээс нь ирээс араатан гэж би боддог.
Either way, the outcome for Oyun and her family is the same. A dead goat is a painful economic blow. The carcass is inedible due to poisonous wolf saliva. There's only one thing left to do: comb its wool to sell at the market. Sunbe knows that educating people about the snow leopard's behavior is key to protecting the animal's future. It's why he spends so much time gathering information and tracking the snow leopard's movements. Today, he's setting up a motion detection camera to take snapshots of the big cats, whose fur patterns are as unique as a human fingerprint.
Бид нар энэ камерыг 2008 оноос хойш тавьж эхэлсэн. Тэрнээс хойш ч одоо за жилд бараг нэг дунджаар 5-6 мянган зураг авч байгаа юм л та.
Making sure he gets a perfect shot is essential. So Sunbe always goes through a last-minute technical check. While the camera captures the cat's stealthy movements, Sunbe returns to his office to examine GPS data from tracking collars fitted to 6 leopards as part of a 15-year study of the South Gobi Desert.
Ер нь цоогор ирвсийг хөдөөчлөлт судална гэдэг бол олон аш холбогдолтой. Түүний нэг нь бол тухайн амьтныг алсын зайнаас өдөөчийн тусламжтайгаар хаана явж гин, өдөрт хичнээн километр явж гин, ямар шуу газар нутгийг эзэмсдэм байна, тэрийг судлах боломжтой.
Finally, the results of the previous day's filming are in, and Sunbe is not disappointed.
Нийт үзүүлсэн ирүүсэн дотроос бол миний одоо хамгийн дуртай ирүүс бол хашаа байгаа. Учир нь яагаад гэвэл хашаа бол хоёр хөөрхөн зулзахтай. Тэгээ ер нь камерт орохдоо тэр хоёр зулзах нь тэгээ маш тийм сонирхолтой зураг авах болдог.
These snapshots are both breathtaking and incredibly rare. There are fewer than 4,000 snow leopards left in the wild. The Gobi boasts the second largest snow leopard population in the world, making ordinary Mongolians the animal's natural guardians. But it's hard persuading locals to protect the animals when they themselves have been victims of an attack. While snow leopards are often wrongly blamed for livestock deaths, there are occasions when the big cats do wreak havoc. Today, Sunbe is visiting one couple whose herd of goats only recently suffered a deadly nighttime visit. Sunbe knows that quizzing a witness to an attack can provide deep insights into the leopard's hunting prowess. For a beast so rarely seen by humans, every shred of information about the snow leopard's behavior is priceless.
그 дараа нь бас 2-ыг өрөөд.
Аа. Нийлээд 5
нийлээд 5 болсон.
За.
For Dembresh and Togo, helping Sunbe is small consolation. The death of 5 adult goats means the couple has lost 2 months' income. Before he leaves, Sunbe makes a final check on how the couple are protecting their herd from further raids.
거리치든 트리안 전에 놀고 있을 때 달아도 달아 해줘 타면서. 내가 소라 타 이런 더 이래도 하면 뭐라래?
These days, for Sunbe, the challenge of keeping the herders on side is easy, compared to defending the leopard from the greatest threat of all: progress. This is the evidence of Mongolia's newest phenomenon. A runaway mining boom that is now seriously encroaching on the snow leopard's territory. These are core samples left on the site by a mining company that has moved onto richer deposits.
Тэгээ одоо ингэ явахдаа бол энэ ойр орчноо ингэ цэвэрлж бариагүй энэ үрд зоргоц бүх юм ингэ хаяа явсан.
With a rapid increase in mining companies flocking to the desert to exploit its underground wealth, the Mongolian government is eager to cash in on the gold rush while it lasts. It's issued dozens of mining licenses across Sunbe's study site.
Нийт бол 37 лиценз энд бол олгогдчиход байгаа. Түүнээс манай эрүүл хамгаалах сан болон орон нутгийн одоо тэр засаг удирдлагууд нийлж яваад ингээд орон нутгийн хамгаалтанд авснаас хойш 10-ад одоо 10 гаруй лиценз ингээд цуслагдчихад байгаамаа. Одоо ингээд одоо бол тэгэхээр нэг 20 гаруй лиценз бол байна.
There's now a ban on mining in this region for the next 7 years. Beyond that, the snow leopard's future remains unclear. Sunbe's discovery serves as a sharp reminder of the colossal challenges Mongolia must overcome to save this beautiful cat from disappearing forever. This reverence for wildlife is at the heart of what it means to live in the Gobi. With its ice-capped peaks, sweeping plains, and breathtaking beauty, it's a place where people experience immense spiritual bonds with nature. One that they nurture from a very young age. 13-year-old Sen Dayush has always had a powerful mystical calling. He lives with his family on the edge of the desert in the South Gobi capital of Dalanzagad. Even though today starts just like any other, it's a very special day for Send. It's the most important in the Buddhist calendar. Today is the festival of Mongolia's New Year, an event for which Send and his fellow monks have been busily preparing for weeks.
Ятар завсан тусал чунд буюу үлдэхэд бол тэгээд өөрийгөө гэгэрүүлж өөрийгөө сайн болгохын тулд ислам болсон.
Sen's lifelong calling to become a Buddhist monk was signaled at the moment of his birth.
Манай ээж л яг манай ээж
Би хүүхдээ гарах яг энийг төрүүлэхэд манай ажид хэвтээс дөөрө байсан. Тэгээ энийг төрүүлээд гараад ирсэн. Манай хүүхэд нөхөөхөө уйлдчихтэй. Тэгтэл ямар сонио сэрхэн унзад хоолойтой унзад лам гэлээд тэ тийм хоолойтой хүүхдээ гэлээ. Тэгсэн тэгээ би бас тэгээ тухайн үедээ бас бэлгшээж үсэн юм яаж.
Using one of the most venerated Buddhist instruments, the conch shell, Zen calls pilgrims to join the holy festivities. And they arrive in droves. This is the one day of the year when praying matters most, because every single prayer has the potential to multiply.
За ганжуур хэмээх энэхүү номыг сар шөнийн 15-нд багтаж бид гандан тэгшлэн хийдээ тойрсон тохиолдолд бидний одоо буян ном улам их дэлгэрч
Inside the temple, there are 14 lamas leading the religious ceremony. But this is just a fraction of the hordes of monks who would have lived here generations ago. For much of the 20th century, Mongolia was caught between two squabbling superpowers, China and Russia. Buddhism in Mongolia has a dark past. With the rise of communism in the 1920s, the Mongolian authorities came under pressure to mirror Lenin's violent anti-religious reforms. Monks were considered counter-revolutionaries, and by the late 1930s, Buddhism fell victim to a bloody purge. Up to 30,000 monks were killed, and 70,000 more exiled or jailed. Religious practice in Mongolia all but disappeared. But with the collapse of the Soviet Union in 1991, everything changed. Now there's a big religious revival underway in the Gobi.
Тэгээ одоо энэ 90 онлоод бол одоо сайхан ингээ шашны дэлгэрэгтэл бүгд одоо тэр нуусан тэр өдөр авдрам даанч гэсэн одоо нуугаад яатсан нууцаар одоо зулмулаа үжээ угуулждаг тэр үлдэр байсан шүү дээ. Тэгээ яаж 90 онд л одоо бүгд гарч ирсэн дээ. Одоо тэр нуусан газруудаас ан гаргаж ирсэн яг тэр чигээр ингээ сайхан.
These days, Mongolian Buddhism is moving with the times. Buddhists are embracing modernity, and the religion is flourishing. Today, more than half of Mongolians are practicing Buddhists. And Mongolia isn't just undergoing a cultural revolution. The whole of the Gobi is in a state of transformation. Urbanization is gathering pace, and people are abandoning their rural ways in the hope of a better life in the cities. In 2010 alone, following the effects of a ferocious winter, more than 20,000 destitute nomads relocated from their desert homes to the capital of Ulaanbaatar. But in deserting the land, people are also breaking the bonds that have enabled them to survive in this desert for so long. And if the trend continues, there is one creature who stands to lose everything. The number of native camels in Mongolia is in drastic decline, and while some manage to exist in the wild, most are domesticated and rely on humans for food and water. As this relationship changes, so too does the role of the animal in everyday life. Today, many of Gobi's camels are more show ponies than workhorses. The faster and more beautiful the animal, the bigger the status symbol. And this is where the proudest owners come to show off their magnificent beasts. 800 kilometers south of the capital, on a snowy plain in Burhun, the annual 1,000 Camels Festival is in full swing. It's the nomadic equivalent of the Olympic Games, a chance to showcase the power and the agility of both animals and owners. Starting with the camel relay. Young, unbroken animals are brought into the ring, and it's the herder's challenge to tame them in every way. Before trying to mount the wild beast, they must first bind it and pull it to the ground. Then cut away its fur, which is plaited into a rein that the rider will use to show the camel who is master. The risk of being thrown and trampled is very real. The ultimate skill is one of final domination, saddling the beast with a packed-down traditional gur and hay for the winter. It's a real spectator sport, and everybody has an opinion. The winning team is always the one with a whole lot of know-how and that little bit of luck. And today, Aditran's one of those who's come out on top. Owner of 60 camels, he's one of the wealthiest herders in the province. He sees the festival as an opportunity to both demonstrate the spectacular power of the animals and promote their plight. But like all the men here today, he has one big event on his mind. The 30-kilometer dash. The winner of this mad camel race across the snowy desert will steal the most coveted festival prize. As the jockeys jostle for position, there are other competitions underway in which the owners are the focus. Nomads are fiercely proud, so couples dress extravagantly in an effort to become this year's best-looking camel-owning duo. Meanwhile, in the big hall, there's a nail-biting game of ankle bone shooting underway. In this ancient take on tiddlywinks, contestants flick animal bones towards a target 10 meters away. The spectators have a curious way of expressing their support, a unified chant that gets louder and higher the better the performance. Back outside, the racing camels are chomping at the bit. As the seconds count down, an eager bunch of herders huddle to wager their hard-earned cash on what is, probably, their one and only bet of the year. With a long stretch of deep snow to navigate, every rider is dicing with death. Within minutes, the race breaks up as a few hopeful riders streak ahead of the main pack. These are the men who know exactly what they are here for today. Then, with one last whip from the winner, the camel race of the year is over. Some racers are disappointed.
Энэ уралдаан зүүнтэй 2 тэмээ гаргасан. 2 тэмээ явуулсан. Тэгээд эхлээ гараад уулна гайгүй явж байгаа. Тэгээд нэг нь эхний эдний ментор явж байгаа. Нэг нь хадуураад тэмээ дагаж хадуураад. Тэгээд бас жоохон хатууд хамартаад хүүхэд нь жоохон дийлээгөө тэгээд хадуураа явцсан.
But where was Iditsaran in the order of things?
Энэ шард дөрөвдөрөг шат байгаа одоо миний. Миний тарам сая төрүүлж явж байгаад одоо эндээс 500 метрийн зайтай бас жоохон суучлаа. Жоохон сэтгэл жоохон дондоорлоо байна. Гэхдээ яг дараа жил юм.
The race winner gets a brand new motorbike. The irony seemingly lost. And for all he's had to put up with, the camel gets a much-needed lift home. Another festival has come to an end and people return to their lives. These are the people who've made a home in a desert that's changing faster than almost any place on Earth. Mongolia's first ever mining boom is gripping the nation. It carries promise of new future, but is cutting deep into the landscape. It's an unprecedented push for progress, with winners and losers. Standards of living are being transformed. Urban growth is advancing at breakneck speed, but all at the cost of an ancient way of life. Today, the destiny of the Gobi lies within the heart of its people. In the face of immense physical challenges, hope springs eternal. Even in the most untouched parts of the desert, resilience is strong. By holding fast to their faith, perhaps the desert dwellers have the power to preserve the spellbinding beauty that is the Gobi.